on the agenda is the e-learning application and inclement weather days. And we have action that's going to be before us to have the board presentation on January 15. The department is prepared to present that today. And so I'm going to ask that Michael Moore come up and address the legal authority. It will be followed by the other information that was requested with Candace Dotson at the department giving some information.
I believe you have guest speakers signed up.
You want to do the guest speakers first? Sure, it doesn't matter to me. So first we have is Jennifer, excuse me. We had some people here that had to leave. Jonathan T. Hoke, principal at Attica.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Hoke. I'm the principal at Attica Junior Senior High School. I'm proud that our school is a leader in the state when it comes to virtual learning, particularly with the e-learning day program, and we are a one-to-one school. We're also one of the recipients of the Office of E-Learning's flexible scheduling grants. Starting with our first e-learning day back in October of 2012, AHS has held 12 days total, including one on a Saturday used last spring with DOE approval for weather makeup. Our 13th e-learning day is actually tomorrow, and our students and teachers I would consider to be e-learning veterans. We have been planning and practicing e-learning for 2.5 years. The 12 e-learning days we've had so far have run like clockwork. Hypothetically, I know our staff could pull off an e-learning day, and if we had inclement weather coming tomorrow, if we had a good idea of that by 3 p.m. today, and that weather were imminent. The upper grades at our elementary have even had 4 experiences with e-learning, and we're crafting a workable solution for our K-4 levels at this time. We've even figured out ways to accommodate our special education students. We'll be ready to go for it this winter if given the opportunity. Once we pound out specifics for our youngest students, we'll submit our snow day e-learning plan to the DOE, and we're very confident that Attica would be approved. Some of our community members and staff who have been slower to warm up to the e-learning concept have been improving with that mindset, with the understanding that this could eventually be a way to replace a snow day. This has been one of the selling points for us since day one. A recent newsletter in circulation, which included comments from representation of this board, noted that a problem with e-learning is, quote, the kid who's sitting at home not having access to a teacher or a day of instruction. Attica has live tech support via phone, email, and instant messaging for all students on e-learning days, which we could even do on a snow day off-site. All teachers are available by the same methods, as we can forward school phone extensions to personal teacher phones. Teachers report absences if the students do not participate in the online lesson or assignment. We have protocols for the small number of students who do not have internet access at home. Instruction can be monitored quite easily since we use My Big Campus as our platform for delivering e-learning, and I can assure you that our teachers would be more than busy from 8 to 3 and far beyond if we were to do this on a snow day. On our scheduled e-learning days, we see all kinds of interesting student and teacher interactions, very similar to what a professor might do in a hybrid class with college students. We could replicate much of that even for bad weather. The concerns in today's resolutions, I believe, would be non-issues for Attica, and with respect to some of the comments made earlier today, I think we would very easily be able to address all of those just at request. The same newsletter involving comment from board representation said that e-learning is not an equivalent experience to the classroom. I would strongly suggest otherwise. Our superintendent's son reported that he spent 6 hours on his recent e-learning day lessons. Others have reported even more time. Generally, students have found that they're putting in a similar amount, although different type of work. As an aside, one of our best teachers, who's a bit cool to e-learning, reported a 97% participation and assignment completion rate on our November 12th date, which was our most recent e-learning day. That's a significant clip better than what most teachers would probably get on a normal day of class. We've shared countless tools with our staff on making e-learning days effective, and I suppose it's debatable about whether e-learning is an equivalent experience to a traditional classroom, but it has been very effective for Attica, and that includes students from poverty and those who are not from poverty. And by the way, our corporation's ECA and I-STEP scores have continued to be on the rise the last few years. I will note this, with what we do at Attica, our students and teachers will get far more engagement and participation out of e-learning snow days than they would out of anything that I might bring them back for in May and June after graduation and I-STEP and ECA are all complete, and when attendance rates would probably tend to suffer. We need to pack in as much instruction as possible by whatever means are available prior to those high-stakes tests on which we're so closely scrutinized, and e-learning on snow days could assist with that. As I represent my entire corporation today, I would say the same is true for our elementary students. We're very happy, as I said, to verify compliance with any of the concerns that the DOE or the state board might have, including some of those that were brought up this morning. We would be happy to do anything necessary. We're always figuring out how to overcome any kind of logistical concerns. It's my duty to do what's best for the students of Attica schools, and I firmly believe that e-learning fits with that plan. Please do not allow this possibility to escape us for the current school year. I thank you for your time.
I'd like to make a comment quick.
You
Yeah.
may, Andrea?
Could I ask you 2 questions? What is the protocol in place for the families that don't have access?
Like I said, we've been doing this for 2.5 years. We're a small corporation. We can work with those families on an individual basis. It'd be a little bit different on a scheduled e-learning day versus a snow day.
Okay.
We certainly have very good partnerships with all of we're a small town. The businesses in town, they know that those that have wireless internet, even the local library, are going to see students on those days. Okay. And a lot of times our students make arrangements with each other to visit each other's homes, to go to a family member's house that would have better internet access. It would be a little bit different on a snow day. We would expect that maybe some of those protocols might still work, but we also understand that some who live maybe way out in the more remote areas of the district, they just might be unavailable.
Okay, but there would probably be fewer of those than students who would not attend on a makeup day, you think?
I don't think there would be
Who
very
knows?
many.
Okay.
So,
And then I just would like your opinion on the length of the school year. And this really has nothing to do with e-learning, but if the funding were available to add 10 days to a school year, do you think that'd be a good or a bad idea? And why?
well, I would. Are you going to ask me that with a group of teachers standing behind me?
I'd like to remind you, you're under oath.
Well, we do what we can do with the 180 days that we have. And I would always encourage the ECA and ISTEP to be moved back further and the results to come back sooner. And we do as much as what we can on the e-learning days that we have.
Okay.
Are you running for anything?
Principal of Attica High School.
Yeah, I wanted to offer a comment and then also a question. You quoted something a little bit out of context, because I think you were actually quoting me. When we talk about e-learning day not being equivalent to instruction, the actual quote was it's not necessarily equivalent to an instructional day. And I'm going to argue there's a difference between we talk about whether or not it's an equivalent instructional opportunity, instructional experience. I don't take issue with the value of e-learning. I think the issue before the board has statutory responsibilities for attendance, and unless you can cite something to me that I'm not aware of that constitutes what comprises a virtual day and shows me that it's equivalent to an instructional day, I do have some concerns, because I used to be a Title I principal and a classroom teacher before that, and the thing that concerns me is that if we're going to start saying that basically this experience is equivalent to an instructional day, then that means that we have already figured out all these unknowns, and I don't think we have, because I don't hear you talking about how we handle the special needs student who's not getting access to critical related services that they normally get when they're in that environment. I don't hear you talking about how we make up the missing human interaction that's so critical to a child, because it isn't just what we teach in terms of reading, writing, and math. It's the hidden curriculum as well that happens in the school. And particularly when you're dealing with at-risk students in high poverty situations, I'm a little concerned by that. So I agree with many of your points. I'm glad you feel that the district is on the right track. I think they need to be moving that way, because I think I can make a larger argument why we need to be looking at e-learning. I'm not sure it's because of inclement weather days, but I think I can make an argument why we need to be looking at e-learning. So I just want to qualify or clarify that comment, because I do believe it is equivalent in the sense of a valuable instructional tool, provided that the person using the tool knows what they're doing. I'm not ready to say it's equivalent to an instructional day, and that's where I was coming from in that comment.
Madam Superintendent, how do you approach, my daughter's a first grader, how would she do an e-learning day?
Well, I'm a high school principal, and I don't want to speak for my elementary principal, but that's kind of what I was referring to, is figuring out a workable solution K through 4. I can speak to what I've heard maybe some other corporations doing and what we're kicking around. As I said, we haven't submitted our application yet because we want to have our T's crossed and our I's dotted before we do it. But to answer your question, I would go for anything that would be a hybrid of something that a parent could do with a student with some kind of digital involvement with it. It's not going to look the same as it would for a high school student, and I'm not an elementary principal or an elementary expert, so I don't know if I can directly answer your question, but it might look different. But I would hope it'd be something that a parent could work on with a student at home with the resources that they have.
And we have very, very strict criteria in order to be able to do the application for snow makeup. And so Candace Dodson will be able to answer your questions because you haven't applied yet even to do that. You've been doing e-learning.
Yes, we've been doing, the scheduled e-learning days, and we want to be very well prepared before we submit our application.
Virtual option for snow days is different.
Correct.
Yes.
For your, sorry, you're not done yet. For your district, what time requirement is required for it to count as attendance for the day?
It's, well, I mean, it's different than, we don't expect it all to be done between 8 and 3. If our teachers open up the possibilities for students to be able to work the evening before, they can do their work then. If those same teachers allow the school day on an e-learning day to go clear until the evening, they have a really wide span of time. So it's not hours or time or anything like that. It's usually, did they do the assignment? Did they participate in the lesson? And we can track that. And if they did, that's how we count attendance. And we hold students accountable by counting them absent when they don't do what the expectation is from the teacher. That's all, part of our process on an e-learning day. It's pretty routine at this point for us.
Yes, Carrie.
And my question is, it's just to open up a dialogue, may not necessarily be one that you can answer, but I have students who are absent.
Sure.
And they do their makeup work when they're absent a day, yet they're still counted absent. And so, my question would then be, why do we keep attendance for anybody? We're still held to this, we have to have 96% attendance rate, when in actuality, if the students make up the work, I have a Canvas page, we email them their assignments home, they call the homework hotline, I send them an email explaining things. And perhaps there is no attendance policy then. If students don't need to come to get the work done, do they need to come to do the work at all?
We also encourage our kids to graduate in 3 years, so, I think we might need to look at time and technology, change our thinking a little bit.
Okay,
One other
Candace?
question, thank you for being innovative. May I ask a question?
Oh,
Thank you. Good, thank you for being here. Sounds like you're an innovative and energetic principal, so thank you.
Thank you.
I also have made some comments about this today. I'm concerned that we're, of developed countries, you already have least amount of days. I agree that technology really, time and place become less important with technology. In my institution, we teach science in 18 different states every day, K-12 schools through professors. I'm all for it. I even used machines called Commodore 64 and TRS-80s. Now, you probably might not have been born back in my own classrooms in the 80s. That was really innovation. I was cutting edge. Don't smile because you don't know what they are. I do.
They're in the Smithsonian.
They are the Smithsonian now, so I'm all for the technology. I don't think it's a replacement. I think it's an extension of. And you answered a few questions that actually confirms my concern. We don't have everything figured out yet. And it might be a good enhancement, and some students are going to benefit, and we ought to push ahead. And you're on that, the bleeding edge, cutting edge, stay
Don't know until
there.
we try.
Keep moving. I want to commend you, but I don't think it's a replacement for a day. And you even mentioned, well, we don't have all that figured. We don't have all that figured out. I agree with you. We do not. We ought to keep pushing on it, and until we do, it doesn't count for a day. Thank you.
Sometimes we mix up a couple of different policy issues, and this is the primary example for me. And today I feel like I'm clear thinking to the point where we're off on tangents. I try to bring us back in. This is another instance of we're mixing up two different issues. We're mixing up e-learning, and we're mixing up the number of days that someone has to go to school. And the number of days someone has to go to school, We'll leave that for another day, for another debate, and I think there's a resolution somewhere that's going to come forward. But I want to put a plug in for e-learning in the state of Indiana. Indiana is way ahead of other states. We're known as an exemplary state for e-learning. Other states come to us to help them move forward on e-learning. And so within the Department of Education, congratulations to staff, the state superintendent, other people who are doing fabulous things. Also, e-learning is part of our strategic plan. So I would hope that at some point, I'm looking to Gordon as our chair of strategic planning, maybe we need to invite DOE staff to really present on that particular priority and really get it launched and moving forward, because there's a really meaningful base there already in place. And I think we could take it to the next level without having to deal with some basic kinds of issues. So moving it forward from a national level, maybe international level. And this is an area that we're really good at in Indiana, so let's highlight it, let's push it forward. So I would ask Gordon to consider maybe at a future meeting, bring some DOE staff to our committee meeting and have that discussion, and then maybe for a full board discussion at some point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Candace? First of all, Michael will speak to the department's legal authority.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about generally the authority for the department to do what it's doing right now. So I'm going to talk first about the use of the waiver, which is allowed in 2030-2. In Indiana, the 180-day instructional requirement actually comes in two statutes. One from the attendance statute, and secondly from the calendar statute. Now, if a school, so the school has to have a policy in place that requires students to attend school for 180 days, and then also to determine what constitutes an excused or unexcused absence. And the calendar statute, if a school fails to provide 180 days of instruction, which is 5 hours for K through 6, and then 6 hours for middle school and high school, when a school fails to do that, there's a financial penalty, and that is the only enforcement of the 180-day instructional requirement. So there really is no hard rule regarding 180 days of instructional time except for a financial penalty. So when that happens, a school can ask the department to waive that penalty by filing a request and showing that because of extraordinary circumstances, they could not provide 180 instructional days. So last year, we had the incredibly bad weather. A lot of schools were closed for some, I think, one was 21 days and some were even more. And the department looked at the waiver program and determined that we had the authority to do a conditional waiver, which is we're going to waive the penalty condition upon your ability to make up that time through other means, one of which was the virtual option. So the virtual option comes from two places. One is the department has the discretionary authority to grant or deny a waiver, and inherent with that is the inherent authority to make that a condition. Secondly, in 2032-8, the superintendent of public instruction may encourage the development and establishment of innovative and exemplary school calendars. And that's what the previous administration had done in 2009 by creating this e-learning pilot program. And since then, it's grown. And so what the department is doing is, with the virtual learning option, is that if a school is going to suffer loss of a day due to inclement weather, then the school can, prior to that happening, provide to us the method in which they're going to provide instruction electronically. So last year we did that after the fact. It was a surprise January 2nd when the weather came so badly, and it continued for almost a month. And we scrambled to create this conditional waiver so schools will not suffer a huge financial penalty in August, which is a reduction of their August tuition support payment by a formula that's within the statute, and allowed students to, or required schools still to provide the same instruction through some other creative method, either extending school days, Saturdays, making up professional development days, or the virtual learning option. So this is very similar to what the department has done since 2009, which is to have, or actually since the Sue Ellen Reed administration, is to have a flat waiver for delay time, and then the department's also had the ability to allow schools to do electronic learning or virtual learning since 2009 in the Bennett administration. So this is not new. This has been happening for a couple of years. And really the issue is we're not waiving the 180 requirement. What we're saying is there's a way to avoid the penalty if you're willing to make up the time through some other means. in this case, a virtual option mean? Yes?
I do think it constitutes, though, a substantial shift in policy, because you keep referencing past practice, and having been in the state 20 years as a principal and teacher, waivers were introduced and considered at the time it was first determined that there actually was an emergency that qualified under that section of the code. And even when Dr. Reed was in office, you know, the thing that we looked at that time, we being as a state, was looking at what was reasonable in terms of how many to make up, and they would use sliding scales, they would do other things. So I don't take exception with that the superintendent has the authority to constitute when a waiver is appropriate given an emergency. What we're doing, though, is we're expanding the scope and the use of e-learning. And all I'm simply saying is because we are expanding its use and we're now applying it to a situation it's never been applied to, I think we do need some help from the legislature in terms of what they'd like to see happen. Because I come back to what my colleague just said about attendance. If I heard you right, basically you're saying the department's interpreting that 180 days isn't a hard and fast rule in Indiana. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Michael, but what I heard you say basically is it's not clear that we're supposed to have 180 instructional days. All I can tell you is the entire time I was in administration, both as a principal and a central office administrator, we sure wrote a lot of attendance letters, and we sure threatened a lot of prosecution of neglect, educational neglect, because people were not in school for the prescribed number of days. So now, all of a sudden, if you're telling me that's an optional, that is a huge policy shift. And for even that reason alone, I would say we would be remiss if the board didn't say to the legislators, we're at a point where e-learning is expanding its scope and use. We understand people want to see it expanded, but we need you to define the box for us. We need to know how to handle an attendance issue, and how do we help a principal who's got to deal with a parent who's going to come in and say, because this is going to happen, a parent's going to say, well, why are you counting my child absent today? Because the other day we had a snow day and they made all the work up and you counted that.
Right.
And we don't know the answer to those questions. I don't expect to get an answer on today. I'm just simply making the case. This is not about the value of e-learning. This is saying we are now entering into an era where we need legislative input, and it's not, and with all due respect to the department, I don't think it's the department's place to come up with a policy. I think they can help be a catalyst for the policy, and certainly I would hope the department would advise lawmakers on what they think would be a reasonably good policy, because I know Candace and others have been doing a lot of work on this, but I think it needs to go back to the lawmakers to give us some guidance, and then if the board needs to write rule around that, then so be it.
I want to explain, you mentioned two things, and principals may have the same question, so I'm glad you asked it. There are two statutes we're talking about. One is the compulsory attendance statute, which is an obligation to students. In that statute, schools are required to establish a policy by which students must attend schools for 180 days, and if there's an absence, that the absence be determined excused or unexcused, and the school has to establish a policy to decide which is which. And then since then, there have been a couple of statutes that have been enacted to say, State Farm participation, or State Fair participation, and other statutory exemptions to that. And then we have the school calendar statute, which is 2030-2. So we have 2033-2 and 2030-2, which can get confusing. What we're talking about here, the only statute that has an implication to school is 2030-2, which is the calendar statute, which requires schools to be in attendance for 180 days, and if they fail to do so, then there's a financial penalty. So that statute isn't being impugned in any way. There's still that penalty there, but a school can waive it if they can justify either exceptional circumstances existed, or and then also meet the conditions of whatever waiver conditions that we place upon them.
Carrie?
I'm asking sincerely, because this will be my chance to ask somebody who could know. So if the school's policy is excused versus unexcused, if the school's policy is to excuse any child who does the makeup work, could they do that and then no child ever has any absences?
No. For the child, no. That would not work that way. Under 2033, which is the compulsory attendance statute, in order for a child to miss instructional time for some other purpose, there are 5 requirements. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what they are. That would not meet the 5 requirements. That would miss one of the requirements, which is that whatever work had to be done can't be done during school time. So under the compulsory attendance statute, the punishment is on the child, not the school, or the parent sometimes, under the failure to enforce laws that exist, which are criminal statutes. So no, a school would not be able to have a policy to say, if you make up the time within our rules, that constitutes an instructional day, which is 5 hours or 6 hours, depending on the age of the child.
I guess I'm just curious, if they did 5 hours of work for you, making up their work, why then that would not be equivalent?
Now, like you said, if they're absent. Now, if there's a scheduled E-day and they're part of the pilot program, then that would constitute an instructional day. But if they're just absent and making up work, that would not comply with 2033-2, which is the compulsory attendance statute.
I understand they're separate. I'm just curious about then the whole attendance thing, because the board is responsible for some of the attendance policy. And
Sure.
so then that becomes, if my child did 5 hours of work at home and they were sick and they made it up the next day, why were they counted absent? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
I see then that being a question, again, as a parent, I might ask that question.
Well, just within what we're doing here today, that would not have been a predetermined plan, whereas if there's an inclement weather and the child can't go to school along with every other child, then every other child have the same requirement. That wouldn't be the same thing, because again, under the attendance statute, the punishment's to the child or the parent, whereas the calendar statute affects the school financially.
So under the waiver piece, then the department gives guidance. So for instance, when the department, and this has happened for years, when the department says, hey, you can do a delay for 2 hours, or do a delay for 3 hours, as has been in some practice through not only prior administration, but also mine, then that is something the department did. We actually shortened the day, so to speak, for the students to address inclement weather. So the guidance that we give at the department and the guidance I gave last year is guidance for last year. And there will be guidance for this year as well. And we already have in place so that school districts could plan because they did some virtual option days last year. We want to be sure that if we want them to exercise that again, then we have very strict parameters about how that should happen, because we have the same concerns that you've been addressing here today. We want to be sure that it affects all students. We want to be sure that attendance is adhered to, and so Candace has that kind of information now to bring forth to you.
I also want to point out too.
Oh, so sorry.
I'm sorry. Many of the schools that have made application and intend to participate in this program, if there's inclement weather, do qualify as performance qualified districts or performance qualified high school, which automatically exempts them from some of these statutes we're talking about anyway. So these schools can do this under that statute as well, which allows them to modify their calendars depending on the individual school needs. So just
And their
looking at
time.
Yeah, they have to provide the same amount of time overall over the 1 year school between June 30th and July 1st. However, they don't have to do a 5-hour or a 6-hour school day if they're determined performance qualified district or performance qualified high school. And just looking at the list that Candace is going to show you, I went through about half of them, and so far all but one qualified as either a performance qualified high school or district.
Thank you very much.
Madam Superintendent, while
Yes,
Candace
Brad?
is coming, can I ask a question of the chair real quick? I just want to make sure, because I do want to hear from her, but under this agenda item, I'm hoping at some point to get the resolution after discussing, because that's the action item.
That is true.
And when the board packet came, when I opened it up, I was looking for a one-page resolution, and there was one-page resolution followed by 52 pages, which basically is 4 slide decks of 4 school corporations. I'm mindful of the time, and I don't want to discourage anybody. I don't know what the plan is, if we're going to actually hear from, are we really going to hear from 4 school corporations on their e-learning plans? How do I interpret what's in my board
No,
packet?
and I
No.
think you were out of the room when I started this
Okay.
agenda item. And I said that the agenda item that's coming forth asked the department to do a presentation on January 15th.
Okay,
And
thank
I
you.
said that we were prepared to do that presentation today.
I do believe that was the case. Thank you so much, because I
You're
was
welcome.
concerned about that, and anyways, thank you, Candace.
We have a few people. Superintendent Ritz
Yes.
and members of the board, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to come before you and talk a little bit about e-learning. And I appreciate all the remarks that's been happening around the table. And we are a leader, and as Dr. Freitas, indicated, nationally, Indiana is well looked upon and looked to for information about how to move to digital teaching and learning. So I hope that it will have a chance to come back in a broader scope and share that. I do invite all of you to visit our website, our Twitter account, all of those things. I hope you're followers of INE Learn, because certainly we share all the things, wonderful things that are going on in our corporations. I'm also very grateful for the many school corporations that are represented in the room today that feel strongly about this work. So while I know that Dr. Oliver's intent was really more about, having legislation look at this, and we're all for that, because for us it's very important that e-learning be recognized as an instructional practice that is very successful. So, but we do want to share a little bit with you about how this all came about, and we'll try to go through this very speedily for you. I know it's a long day. First of all, I just want to clarify that e-learning, in our interpretation, the Office of E-Learning, that's everything that has to do with instructional technology. So everything that's going on in our schools comes under my department, and so that's much broader than what we're going to speak about today. Also, the words get mixed up a little bit, even by our own districts, which I appreciate, but we have separate things that I'm going to talk about that took us to this virtual option that was brought about last year. So you can see here on the board, how do we even be able to offer this inclement weather? So in 2009, as all of you know, there were changes in the rules for textbook adoption funding that opened that door to technology in Indiana. In the 5 years since, our districts have greatly expanded the use of technology, into which many students have device ratios of 1-to-1, whether that's a take-home model or in the school. So you can see here on our self-reporting map that is very, very widespread. We also know in my office that's not just about the devices, as you all well know, and I know your strategic plan talks about a lot of that. It's about what happens with those devices. It's about infrastructure. Do we have a level playing field? I know a lot of you have questions about connectivity. As you know, the superintendent's legislative agenda asks for another additional $15 million in a tech fund to level that playing field. So certainly this is an ongoing conversation, and certainly not perfect in every regard, but you can see that we have a lot of things going on right now that puts us in a great place to do that. So also then has been indicated in some other conversations back prior, actually I started in the DOE in 2011, and even prior to that there was this talk about this flex pilot. What would it look like now that we have so many students using technology in the classroom and teachers using a blended model? What's the possibilities from that? And so we created this flex pilot. And so really 3 schools, we started with that, and the earliest of these districts, they really were asked to propose innovative ways to look at learning outside of the traditional day. And that's what I want to bring back to. There's been many talk here about instructional day. What we're saying is we're not excusing anyone from 180 days of learning. What we're saying is learning today can look very different from a teacher standing in front of you inside of brick and mortar. So we're not excusing the fact that students are learning, they're just learning differently. Is it all perfect yet? No. And that's why we have things like the Flex Pilot. Through these pilots, these districts designed and implemented what many of them call E-days, and I know Attica talked about that, where their teachers remained at school possibly doing PD, but supported students who learn from home. And that's been done by schools in limited groups, maybe just for one set of students, a middle school set of students, or even a specific class. So that pilot, though, has given us tons of information. The thought and planning that went into those programs was really massive. They had to, sorry, this is not clicking. They had to fill out an application that not only talked about their capacity to deliver standard content through the online learning management system and to communicate virtually with their students, but they also met strict guidelines for supporting their students on their IEPs, feeding students who traditionally receive lunch support, and communicating at length with their communities. And while this transition was difficult for some, positive feedback came in from all stakeholders, and teachers learned to refine their expectations. So that original pilot then, really they joined together with other districts around that idea, and I know Attica mentioned the flexible scheduling component that was put together. They've developed an entire framework for other districts to build off of, and so we have granted that flex pilot places where these are very planned days, they are outside of inclement weather. But what they provided for us, and here are the 12 districts that are in that pilot right now. So the original 3 are there. We added 6 the second year, and we're up to 12 this year. Again, I speak with all of these. My team does. We talk with them. We work through their plans. We go visit the school corporations. We talk to them. They talk to each other. So that's where we are with the Flex pilot. And that's pilot then, the intensive planning of that went before, enabled us to be able to offer this virtual option. So when the weather was so brutal last year, and the superintendent, and I know you all agreed to it, wanted to provide options for our districts so they wouldn't be in school in July, our students, we were able to look back on those programs and the capacity of our districts and say, let's give them the option, if they would, if they have the capability to do it, to use virtual option for inclement weather, which is what we call that option. And you can see last year we had 25 public and charter districts or schools participate, 13 private, and only 76 days total across those were used. So the point also I want to make about this is a very small percentage of our districts. This is not a widespread thing, and even as we go forward, we are still learning, we are still tweaking it, but it is, we're trying to get it right so that we have great models and great resources for those that come beyond that. So we have an application that they fill out, and like the FLEX program, districts have to declare their capacity to support this model and complete the application with the IDOE. That application has a number of assurances that districts must meet. Everything from they can demonstrate access to the internet for students and teachers away from their building. Does that look different in every one of our districts? Absolutely. As Attica indicated, they can work certain things out within their community. Other districts, I know John Trout's in the room. I know for Madison Grand, he's made phone calls to families and said, how can we help? We have districts providing wireless hotspots to students. We have just different ways of people doing that. And again, I go back to our legislative push this year is to help bring that connectivity to everyone. But we go on down these lists of assurances that schools have to sign off on. Teachers will be directly reachable from students and parents to facilitate and support instruction during the day. That's met in many different ways across the state for those districts that are doing it. So I've seen teachers hosting virtual Google Hangouts with students on air, teaching them. They have office hours. They're running live chats during the day through Skype or through Google. I've seen relay systems like Attica spoke of where teachers are able to be contacted by phone and by email. Also, because we have learning management systems across the state that allow students to cache their work before they leave the school. So that means even if they go home and they don't have internet, much of their work, all of their work can be cached inside of, for example, My Big Campus, even video, and still be accessed offline. So then they do have access to that learning. And teachers, for special students, maybe with certain accommodations, they work with those teachers, they work with those families, and they might provide an alternative to that for a completely virtual thing. But we have teachers and students meeting that in districts individually. So these, you can read through these, and we can certainly share the application. It's online. You can get to it right now. You can see that these are signed off on by the superintendent saying, in our district, we are meeting the needs of our students and our community and our teachers, and yes, we can meet these. So that's what happens in that point. And then at the end of the year, by May, the 1st of May, we ask for all of them to submit back to us how many days they actually used. Many of them will not use a virtual option, but just on a makeup day, or they're going to use their built-in days before they ever even consider the virtual option. So at the very end of all of this, like in May, we will have them submit a report to us that says, this is what we actually used, these are the days we used it, and these were our attendance. And again, I think you've heard there's different ways of looking at attendance. Certainly, I know Dr. Oliver teaches online. We can certainly see when students are engaged online. We can see when they've logged into learning management systems, how many minutes they spend in there, how the teachers are engaged with that way. We can see by the work that's turned in then how much time is spent. So we look at that in many different ways. We certainly, on a regular school day, I was a teacher for many years, and I would hope when I was standing in front of them or working with them, they were all paying attention and learning. I know that wasn't always the case. So sometimes I think we can actually monitor it a little better when I see how many minutes they're actually engaging with the content online, ironically enough. Anyway, after last winter, the Office of E-Learning, we called upon a lot of our districts that had used the virtual option to share the processes. So we have webinars up. We've had in-person presentations all over the state. And I, myself, and my team have fielded numerous calls and talked with districts, many times with superintendents in districts that after our conversations say, we're not ready for this. We're not there yet. I know the people in the room, they have also fielded many, many calls. I've sent them as the models of how it could work. And they've done that. We have had visits to many of our schools again. We are in a national collaboration. I've been working with the Department of Kentucky's Department of Education, Pennsylvania's Department of Education, Ohio. Everybody kind of in this together because, again, as you saw in that first thing, everyone's getting to the place where virtual education can be used. So how they implement their own versions of the virtual option just makes us a leader and makes all of our districts leaders to this. So this year, as the superintendent indicated, we went ahead and put the application out now. There's a lot of reasons for that. And as the superintendent indicated, it gives a school corporation a chance to know that that's a possibly even option. We've had schools doing what I would call practice, where they will, on a certain day, say we're going to send home all the devices tonight. And tonight we're going to have students engage in a couple of low risk, low stakes kind of activities. Maybe they have to log in, they have to, send something to their teacher, meet their teacher in a chat, something so that they can work out any of the bugs that might exist in terms of technology. So knowing ahead of time is given opportunities for those schools to kind of work through those before it actually comes. So right now we have 35 public and public charters that have applied to have the virtual option this year if needed. And then we have 10 private and parochial schools. Out of our public and the charter schools, 71% of those are A and B districts, just because I know that's been a concern. So that's where we are. Again, very small percentage of our schools overall. And I know many of them have said last year the most days that were used by any one district was 6. And so really it's also a very small percentage of their actual overall days. So I do have just a couple of people in the room, and if they would come up, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to hear from them just very briefly about what it really looks like in their district. So I have Yorktown. Yorktown had to leave, but Zionsville and Mechanical are here, and they're just going to go through a few things with them. So I'll let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit.
This is what I just asked about.
That one to make it go, but you're just, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jenny Fraley. I'm the Chief Academic Officer from Zionsville Community Schools. Thanks for having us today. I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the goals that all of us, I think, around the state as educators had when we had to deal with the effects of last winter. And I'm not here to pitch you on digital learning. I think that it's important for us to understand that that is a given. Our students live, learn, and work in a digital age. They're going to learn, live, and work in a digital age. I don't think any of us are arguing about that. Our challenge as educators is to figure out what the implications of that are for us and how we prepare the kids as well as we can to be able to create, communicate, and collaborate comfortably online. Our goals last winter were to try to figure out how we could reduce the number of days we might have to add at the end of the school year as a result of the 7 missed days of school we had due to snow. And we ended up adding some of those days in multiple different ways. And one of our options was to have some of those days as e-learning days. We are already doing e-learning days with our middle school students. We're a 1-to-1 environment, 5 to 12. We had some interesting things that we learned about how to do better so that we could offer those same options to our elementary students. Our parents and families worked with us. We surveyed them. They were very much in favor of what we were doing, and they helped us get better as we were working through it. We wanted to make sure that we provided instruction that was in keeping with the scope and sequence of our curriculum, and especially because my high school teachers were pounding on us about AP exams. Kids in Arizona did not miss 7 days of school due to winter last year, but they were going to take the exam on the same day as our students, and they felt they wanted our students to have that equal playing field and be prepared and not be adding on the days in June 4 weeks after they had taken their AP exams. They wanted that instruction contiguous with what was happening and ready. The same is true of teachers who were helping students prepare for high-stakes state tests. We wanted to make sure that we offered students strong experiences with digital learning. That is part of college and career readiness. I have 2 college students myself. I know they can earn college credit in the state of Indiana online. And we want to make sure that we have students who are prepared to do that well and comfortably and know how to do it successfully. And we also, I think, found that we had a goal of wanting to try to increase our teachers' capacity to design and deliver digital instruction. Digital instruction is something that is nice to do right now for teachers. A lot of our teachers are very comfortable with it. Some of our teachers are gaining comfort with it. And when we decided we were going to really try to deliver this, some of you talked about teachers of first graders and teachers of special needs students. we really had to get surgical about figuring out how we were going to design and deliver really quality digital instruction to all of our students. If we were really going to offer this to all, we needed to figure out how it was going to look. So those were the goals that we embarked on this with last winter, and we are excited about what they have yielded, and we are ready to continue that voyage. I think it's going to make us all better. Our colleagues around the state collaborate constantly, talking about this and ways to continue to get better together. So I just wanted to share that piece, and I know that I have a colleague up next.
Quick question. So 7 days off, if I'm an art student, how do I do e-learning? If I'm a shop student and I'm fixing
Right.
small engines, how do I do e-learning?
Well, hopefully you're not taking apart the car at home without anybody's permission, because that would not be a good plan. You know, every teacher had to come to this in his or her own way. And so I think it's important to remember that particularly for us in our 5 through 12 setting, those students are already doing things online with their teachers as part of their learning. Could they throw a pat on the pottery wheel at home? No. But what they could do is other types of learning that could take place at home, and that frees up time then when they're back in school to do those other more hands-on things that do require that instructor or that equipment or that direct oversight of some process. So I think, you know, I would be remiss to tell you that this is a one-to-one swap for a high school science experiment where we're going to throw chemicals together over a Bunsen burner. No. Different delivery models require different types of instructional delivery. Professionals have to think thoughtfully about that, and they have to pick and choose what matches best with the delivery model at hand. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do. I think it's a tough trade-off. When you move to a different system, you have to do that. I just went to a national conference and heard instruction live from people. I also learned in a webinar the other day online with colleagues from around the state while sitting at my desk, and I read a professional journal over coffee this morning. There are lots of different ways we learn and lots of different ways for that to happen.
I understand there's a difference between high school AP math and college students, but I think it might be a little more challenging for, you know, certainly the younger students as well as different subjects that maybe aren't as easy to do from a virtual environment.
I just wanted to interject that I've seen some amazing examples of art where there's great apps that young kids have used to create pictures, to learn about color wheels, to do all kind of things that fit into the standards of art but look differently. Our phys ed teachers, I've watched students online and actually at home doing the Dance Fever, where the teachers have uploaded themselves talking about it. They've had them take their heart rates at home. They've instructed on that. They have them following the dance moves at home. And so it's really interesting to watch, as Jenny was saying, teachers take a real look at what it is we're doing and how can teaching and learning look differently. You're right, it doesn't look the same in an AP, English class as it does for a first grader. But there are so many of us, how many of us have our own children or know of children who have, when they're handed this, know exactly what to do with it? And we are doing better and better about teachers utilizing those things in the schools and finding ways to do that. One thing Jenny didn't talk about is the amazing way Zionsville has went around getting their teachers up to speed on this. And it's kind of a gradual release of getting to the lessons where they had their teachers work collaboratively. A few of those were really good at it, to design a lesson for everyone for the first day. And then little by little, they've given that back to their own teachers. So again, this is not something we do just, do it. This is a very thought out, workable plan that people have worked very hard on. I know McConaughey wanted to say a few words about that.
Sarah, did you have a comment?
I just had a quick question, and I want to preface by saying very clearly that I am a huge fan of e-learning, and I fully support everything going on and everything that you're sharing today. My concern goes strictly linked to the use as implement weather, and I come to this from an elementary perspective because that's my life, that's what I do. And I'm thinking about the importance of differentiation within my classroom as well, and what I can do with small groups when I'm in a first grade classroom. And I have everything from a student who doesn't know the difference between numbers and letters to a student who's reading at a 5th grade level. And I'm curious how you replace a school day in a setting such as this and still meet all of the individual needs, especially with the example of a student who might not be able to read it wouldn't be able to turn on the computer and read directions or head into
When
an
we get to
assignment.
that level, of course, if they can't turn on a computer, obviously those teachers have worked with those students. But beyond that, and I think you certainly realize this, and I'm an elementary teacher, personalized learning can be really enhanced by technology. So when I can walk over to a student who may be in a class of readers and they're a non-reader, and I can hand them the iPad or whatever the device is, and it has some things that they can work on at their needs. Technology is a wonderful thing for truly personalized learning and meeting the needs of students in a way that's both engaging to them and can bring back that to me. So a lot of times as teachers are doing that every day in their classrooms, on a day that goes home, what you take home may be very different than from what Mr. Walker takes home. But again, it's going to meet your needs, and it's something that these teachers are working very hard to get to. So it's not, and no one's coming to the virtual option that's not prepared. When we say in those things, your students will learn, you have to say, yes, we can deliver on that. We know how we're going to address it. And then they have worked so hard with their teachers to learn that. And I don't want to, I know.
Because we are getting into some of the questions that were asked. How is instruction monitored? How do we do attendance? Those types of things that you have concerns about, we have all thought about. And the few school corporations or the few schools, and you notice the first speaker said 5 through 12, they're not doing it for your little ones yet, right? Is that correct?
We're 1-to-1, 5 through 12, and we're doing e-learning with those students.
But I meant for-
Our
correct.
younger students did do it last
And you're
year.
inclement. Okay, good.
My name is Craig Jernigan, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes to listen to what we have to say. Principal at McConaughey Middle School. We are a K through 12 1-to-1 district. We did participate in 4 planned virtual days last year, e-learning days, and 4 on the actual day of the snow virtual days last year. So we address a lot of different things, but the big thing is plan. And something I've heard a lot today is communication, and communication was key with every stakeholder involved. We had multiple times where we'd meet with parents. I would meet as a principal on the phone or in person with parents who had a concern. Had to communicate it with teachers, had to communicate it with students. One thing you said is, what do you do with that kid who can't even turn their computer on? We knew what kids were going to struggle with that prior to the snow day or prior to the e-learning day. It's something, a procedure, just like you do with anything in class. How do you do those things? So communicate with all those stakeholders, make sure you train. Professional development is huge. You have to train your teachers on multiple different facets of what are you going to use that's engaging, rigorous, and goes along with the curriculum that's standards-based. And that's huge for your teachers. So you make sure you do that as well with your teachers. Parents, we live in a district that's about 63% free and reduced. We know that we had to communicate with them that, hey, we had to get out in front of, hey, I don't have internet. What do I do if I don't have internet? We know that about 85% of our kids have internet. So what do you do with those kids that don't have internet at home? And we came up with some strategies, even with our snow days, to where they could participate in e-learning by caching all that information into their computer the day before, taking it home, having it turned back in by 8:30 that next day. There's always available teachers on their phones, whether it's relayed to them through our phone system, or our tech department, even on a snow day, would don the 4-wheel drive sleigh and make their way into school for any technology issues. So a lot of things that we addressed leading up to it that took a lot of planning, a lot of man hours.
Thank you. We have one final comment. Go ahead.
I'll be quick.
Skip on up to the,
My name is Judy Off. I'm the technology director at McConaughey, and yes, we were at school every snow day fielding phone calls. And I think one of the best things for us is day 1 was our planned e-learning day, and we took over 100 phone calls from students, parents, whomever on that particular day. Maybe not all technology issues, but I can't get number 6 in my calculus book. Can you help me get a hold of my calculus teacher? Sure, we can do that, and got them hooked up with their calculus teacher. But by the snow day that we had in March, we took under 20 phone calls on that day. So that was about the 6th day that we had of e-learning. Not all of them were snow days, but the 6th day total. And our parents, our students were used to it. They knew what to do, they knew the routine, But again, communication was important. We worried about our special education students. We had a plan. We knew what we were going to do. We reiterated that plan to the parents of the special education students. We write that plan into their IEPs now because we know that we're probably going to have a snow day sometime during the school year. Our teachers of record for those students call those homes every snow day to answer questions, to offer assistance, to give them guidance if they need to. The same thing with our EL students as well. They do the same thing. Our principals in all the buildings looked at e-learning assignments before they went home to make sure that they were valid, that they were good, that they were rigorous. Some of them went back to the teachers for revision. So our principals are very involved. They know what's going on in the classroom. They know what's going on at home with the students. Our community is very supportive of this. It's been very successful for us, and we'd appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much. Oh, Sarah?
Sorry, can I ask you a quick question? Regarding the special needs students, I know that you stated that you wrote some of that into the IEPs. Did you lower the minutes allowable for related services on the IEPs to accommodate the virtual snow days?
I know that the special ed teachers wrote into their IEPs. I can't give you specifics on that.
Because, and I don't remember if it was Dr. Oliver who brought it up before, but for example, my daughter receives, through her school, receives PT, OT, and speech, and it's worked throughout her school day. So I'm thinking of some of the inclement weather where it is multiple days and it's in a row in that, and she's losing those services. If the days are not made up, she does not still have access to those. So I'm just trying to think through how that affects these very important services that the students don't have access to otherwise. And again, I fully support it. I just think that there's more work to do in formulating how it applies right now.
Scale it out.
Right.
Candace, you want to finish up? Candace, you want to finish up? Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm sorry. We were talking. Well, I just want to say we have, and we have other people in the room, that IEP has been addressed. And again, it kind of goes back to the individual districts that we all, some of our districts, they've worked very hard with those independent. They've built it into their IEPs. They've found ways to address those things. I know, and again, it's a very small percentage of days that are being used at this point. We are not, advocating for this to be an every day of instruction for all of our students. But we are certainly have lots of models, and we can get some more concrete suggestions from a lot of our districts. But, that's what, when we have calls, I talk to them, can you meet the needs? What does that look like? Let me point you to people, and they will point you to their special education departments. But we have, a statement in there that says, if you sign off on that, you are addressing that in some way. And again, looks different in Zionsville maybe than it does in Mechaniqua, because we want to meet the needs of our students. So we just have some tips for people, and this is the kind of things we share with everyone. Communicate, you've heard that. So I hope that you see from this that this is not something that's been entered into lightly by anyone. We've had, for many years back, actually since 2011, these kind of things happening. I know that we are building on it. There's always tweaks to be made as they're in all instruction, in all kinds of classes and schools around our state. But you all have been very supportive of innovation, and we want to continue that, growing that, and continue to be a leader. I am happy to talk with legislators if we can broaden their scope and change legislation to make this an even easier lift for all of our schools. I'm happy to be a part of that conversation. So I thank you, and I certainly thank all the districts that are here today. There's many more. Some of them had to step out when the day went a little long, but I really do appreciate all of your listening and all of your support in this.
And I would add that you have a division, e-learning, all yourself, and several people working with you who actually have on-the-ground monitoring to be sure that we have in place what it is that the corporation says they're doing. So we are very diligent. This is a very strenuous and strict application process. They have to prove that they can meet the needs of all children when they actually apply for this.
And I was just in Southwest Allen, and I know I see the superintendent here, and we've had those conversations many times. We do, because we're e-learning, we do virtual hangouts with leadership teams from around our state, visit classrooms. Certainly would welcome any of you to give us a call, come with us, take a look at what's happening. There's exciting things happening. You should be proud. I hope you are of what's happening in Indiana around instructional technology in our schools, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
Can I ask just one more
Oh,
question?
yes, you may go ahead.
In order to gain approval on the application, what percentage of the student population has to have access to the internet to currently be allowed to use this as an
What,
inclement
Go
weather?
ahead, Candace.
can I answer? What it says is that you have to prove that your students can access the learning away from your building. So, and I'm going to pick on Zionsville for a moment. Through their own surveying, they know that even though they may not be handing a device to every child, you know, a very high percentage of Zionsville students have that access at home. So that looks very, very different. You know, so we're not going to say to every district, you must be handing them the device, because that's just not the reality in some of our districts. So what we say is, can you prove that your students can access the learning away from your buildings? Now, again, that may be for some kids with special accommodations, something that's more concrete that they take home, or it may be, you know, that it's a makeup day, so they're going to open the schools. Many of our schools are open. Yorktown opens on those makeup days, so kids can come in if they need. So it just looks very different. So we're just saying, whatever that looks like in your district, can you do it? And they say yes.
So is that the expectation that it's 100% access?
That they can access the learning. Whatever that looks like to individual students may look very different.
So in the districts that I'm looking at that say that they have a backpack set up for their elementary students, are you considering that access then? Because they've got stuff in a backpack they take home and they do it like correspondence work? And bring
No,
it
as a
back?
matter of fact, Dr. Oliver, that's a very good point. And just 2 weeks ago, we gave or 3 weeks ago, we gave a big presentation on that. And someone asked me from the audience, so if we send home you know, many people call them blizzard bags in other states. You know, if we send home a bag of worksheets, can we apply for the virtual option? I'm like, no, there's nothing about that's a virtual option. If a school district has, you know, a certain small population of students that may need some additional information that comes home in a backpack, maybe kindergartners have some books that go home along with it, you know, some way that they're going to interact online, then that's okay, but we're not, I'm saying to students, if you're going to send worksheets home and a thing, this is not the option from you, no.
And see, I guess where I'm struggling still is that before we scale this out, okay, I come back to what's in the best interest of a child.
So do we.
So, okay, and I'm not disputing that, but I'm struggling in my mind if I'm just taking out the education degrees and just plugging in some common sense. A child who's in poverty, who's highly at risk, or is a special needs student, how is this an equivalent opportunity than having the human interaction with their classroom teacher?
And I will say to you,
Because historically, I got to tell you, and again, I could be wrong on this, last year was an anomaly.
it was,
We
and
haven't
I
seen
hope it
weather like
is. I
that
hope it
since
is.
1978. For the most part, we have 3-4 snow days a year, if that, and it's worked pretty well. So I guess I'm struggling because I want to see e-learning respected and used well, but I think when
do
you
too.
try to take any instructional tool outside of what it was really intended to do, somebody, I think it was you referenced earlier, I teach with e-learning, I do, but we're talking master's degree people and
Yes.
doctorates, not 6 and 7-year-olds who are at risk in poverty or special needs. There's a world of difference between the infrastructure and the technology we put in to do what I do at an adult learning level and an emerging learner. So, I mean, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of when we scale it up, why do we think this is better? Because if we thought it was better, I would be leading the charge today on why we should just make this happen. But we're moving forward basically with a policy created at the department level without any opportunity for the electorate to say how they feel about it through the representatives to even give us some kind of legislative direction. So I guess I hope you understand when the board members are talking here, we're not against e-learning. I'm concerned about why we're doing it, and is it really truly the best thing? And I think that's a conversation, honestly, that it's better left across the street with the
Well,
General Assembly.
I want to just address, go ahead.
I just have a question. The high-risk child is at high risk on a snow day, but that child's going to be home on a snow day. So
But they're
I
gonna make that
feel like
day
at
up.
least if there's some kind of if a high-risk school district is able to meet the requirements, there's at least some benefit to having some kind of engagement going on with that child on a snow day. Seems to me that almost becomes a safety net for that child, because I know for a fact that Indianapolis Public Schools hates snow days. They want their children in school on those days, and the superintendent calls a snow day as a last resort to ensure their safety, because some of the kids are a lot safer at school than they are at home. So I don't see how.
To your point,
Yeah.
Andrea, I would argue that the best thing would be is to provide things for them to be working on that would be in addition to the instructional day, and still have them make up the instructional day, because What is an issue right now is that they're not going to go 180 days. They may only go 170. They may go 172. In the scenario I'm describing, they're still going to get 180 instructional days. They're going to get 180 opportunities to be with somebody who cares about them, nurture them, a warm meal, a safe building. And I'm just saying, we're saying is that, when I weigh those two options, when we're talking about young children particularly here, why would I say
Well,
that
true,
option's
but the
better?
reality is, if you look at that list of school, there aren't very many high-risk schools on that list right now who are in a position to even offer that virtual learning opportunity.
That's exactly right, and I do want to make that point. I've had so many corporations call me or come to our presentations and say, oh, you know, we'd like to get to this. I mean, I look to my former colleagues in the back in Evansville-Vandenberg School Corporation, an amazingly innovative technology district, but I know they're not there yet. They discuss it, but they have a very diverse population and a large population, so it isn't right for everyone or every student at this point, and not every district is there, but we're getting there, and when we get that $15 million and can, you know, raise the connectivity for more and more of our districts. So these great models that are happening now provide us with the kind of learning and the kind of ways that we can say, is this better? I also keep saying, these days are learning days. They look different than if I'm standing in front of you, but teachers make great relationships. We have so many virtual programs outside of this whole thing that are working wonderfully for certain students, and we support those. We have flipped models in our classrooms. We have so many things happening. So again, I appreciate this discussion. Look forward to more of it about e-learning. Yes.
I have a
Oh, sorry.
I have a money question. Virtual schools, do they get, if a student goes to a virtual school in the state of Indiana, do they obviously through school choice can take their voucher money and go? Is it the same amount of money as a student gets for a public school?
I don't know.
I don't know, but we're not talking about virtual schools here.
No, but I guess the reason I'm asking is if, let's say, you did 10% of your school days through e-learning days, and a virtual school gets 90% of the funding of a public brick and mortar school, is there some monetary involvement in terms of it being, those days being virtual days, being money then? Do you see what I'm asking?
Are you asking if there's a snow day, do they get less money?
Basically, because do virtual schools get the same money a public
He
school
wants to
gets?
know is the per pupil, is the per pupil amount the same?
Yeah, it's 90% of the tuition support they would normally get if they were a public school or public school corporation. So they get 90%.
And I'm just asking then if there are some financial ties then, or some ramifications of, again, that's why I guess I think the legislature could look at some of that, because maybe they're going to feel like if you hit a certain number of snow days, you become a partial virtual school, and then that becomes a monetary.
Virtual schools are only charter schools. Only charter schools by law can be virtual schools in and of themselves, so they only throw them out there. Public school corporations, right now, there's no statute allowing for them to be solely a virtual school. Only a charter school can do that.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, Sandra.
I just feel like the schools that we heard from today know a lot more about e-learning and how this will work than the legislators that we would seek guidance from. I think we ought to reward these schools that have really developed an e-learning program that they use very selectively, and I think it should be very selective, and we should reward them by allowing them to do them on snow days. That to me is an advantage all around, and I can't imagine that schools that aren't in a position such as Attica is in would be able to throw it together. So we've got schools who already have pretty sophisticated programs in place, would be the only ones taking advantage of the snow day option. So I think we ought to encourage that kind of innovation and excitement at the school level instead of discourage it. And I don't think the legislators know any more about it than most of the rest of us, but these schools know about it because they put these programs together.
So I would make my final comment to really say that this has not been driven by the department. This has been driven by the field. The field, the schools, the school corporations want to have the flexibility to make up time, real time, if they can make it happen, for a variety of reasons. Making up all the days or making up most of the days after school and the assessments have been given are not as productive, and you will hear them all say that. They're not as productive as making up and having learning real time. So the attempt to give that option to the schools has been driven by the field. and has asked the department to consider it. We considered it last year. We put it into operation. We've had several years of pilot work with it. I was very strict about what it is that it looks like, and the application process that needed to be brought forth. So I think the only question here really is that I see that there are members of the board who want to have the legislature weigh in. They're going to weigh in if they want to weigh in, and they're going to, I mean, that's what they do. And so we welcome that dialogue. If they want to weigh in, we welcome the dialogue. I feel as the superintendent of public instruction, I have implemented options for schools, conditions of the waivers, and I have a variety of things that have been implemented. Some were new last year, others were continuations of former superintendents. And this is part of the dialogue and the conversation, and we welcome it. And I was pleased to be able to present what was asked of us to present January 15th. This is a vital issue that school districts are wanting to have the dialogue now, not in another month. And so I said I'll be prepared to actually do what is in this resolution today. Carrie?
I just want to say, though, I don't feel like asking the questions is in any way or should not be intended to be that we're discouraging them from doing the great things they're doing with technology. My school corporation is 1-to-1, 612. It's a lot of work, and so if they can, I mean, they're doing it well, and so kudos to them. I think that if the legislature chooses then to bring up the topic, they will certainly be able to convey the same thing that they conveyed to us, but it also then gives the opportunity to add to the discussion. Should there be some continuity in what's required of everybody? You know, we're hearing this school corporation does it this way and this one does it this way. Maybe some things need to be done in a similar way. Maybe the IEPs need to be written a specific way to guarantee success for everybody. And so I don't think more discussion of it is a negative thing. I think it then adds to, like my corporation then saying, hey, we can do that. If now that they've set this up and this is what we can do, we can copy that, and I'd be happy to jump on board.
The value of e-learning is an important instructional tool. It's an essential instructional tool. It isn't just something we pull out of a hat when we need to have a makeup day because of snow. And so that's why I've sort of not really participated in this discussion, because I think of e-learning as an essential instructional tool. It's much broader. And I'm a little disappointed to hear that we have to make up a snow day, therefore we'll trot out some technology. It's unrelated to the curriculum. And I'm not trying to be negative, but what I'm saying is it needs to be integrated into the curriculum. It should be part of what the curriculum is all about, and it should be integrated. So when I look at schools and they're making a request to use it for a snow day, my question really is, how are you integrating technology in your everyday curriculum? And if you are, that's terrific. It's just another location of an instructional day, could be at home.
Right, and these are schools that have already integrated it with their curriculum. So they're getting the option of, since they've already done it anyway, of being able to do that on snow days as well,
But I'm not sure that's happening across the state.
Students watching television all day.
Well, I have to say, that is one of our assurances, is that this is part of the ongoing what you're teaching. This isn't just all of a sudden today we're going to do a digital citizenship unit for everybody that's unrelated to what we've been teaching and learning every single day. Is that everywhere? Certainly not, and that's why not everyone's applying. That's why we discourage some people. Are we helping? And again, that's another conversation. We have so many things going on in this state that's helping people get there. You know, whether it's the summer of e-learning, I hope you all will come this summer, but there's so many things that happen to build that pedagogy shift, that mindset, those skills for students so that we can all get there. So lots of people don't apply. Lots of people cannot say yes to that thing. Is this going to be a continuation of learning and not just something that we pull out of our hat that day? Yes.
So my follow-up question is, if it's so great, and I think it is, by the way, I really think the one-to-one programs and technology is the way to go. Why do we wait for a snow day to have it implemented?
Well, we're not waiting.
homes.
We're not. So
I-
many of our
I
districts
would-
are not
I would maybe
waiting.
disagree with my colleague. That's why I'm raising
Oh.
it, that maybe we should count some of these so-called snow days where we use instructional technology as instructional days.
That's what we
So-
want to do. We are counting them, and that's what we say.
I just want to reinforce that, because I agree with my colleague Brad on a number of issues, but this is one, I think, where we may disagree on.
That's fine.
And I know Andrew is on board with what we're talking about. And I'd like to see it expanded greatly and really move forward.
And, we want to expand it, but certainly we want to do it as, I think, Dr. Oliver, we want this to work. We want it to be well thought out. We want our students to be successful. Of course we do. We want to meet the needs of our students. So if they're not ready, if the teachers aren't there at that place, if the students aren't able to do it, if districts can't deliver it, no, we're not advocating for that. We're saying, let us build resources around you. Let us help you throughout the year get there. Let us show you models of wonderful people that are doing it. But we're not all there, and that's why not everyone applies.
Brad?
I'd like to move the resolution to the floor so I could actually make a comment on the actual resolution, which was the action item. So I'd like to move that we entertain the resolution regarding virtual option that was in our board packet, and then I'd like a chance to come back and make a comment.
Are you wanting to modify it since I've already complied?
No, I'm simply basically wanting to make sure everybody's clear that the date, I think on an early version said January 15th. I think our next meeting date is January 7th, so the assumption would be that the final, if we adopt it, there would be a hearing on the 7th.
This doesn't ask for a hearing, it asks for the
It
department
asks
to
for a
present.
presentation to the board. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word hearing. I'm asking simply to make sure that everybody understands the date under where it says, whereas be it resolved, the board directs the department to present to the board at the January 15th. That actually would be the January 7th meeting, just to be.
So you're asking
accurate.
for the very same presentation again on January 7th?
I am asking that we entertain the resolution, and I'm waiting to see if there's a second, and then I'll have some more comments.
Second.
Thank you. May I make a few comments?
You may.
Yes, I am. I just want to make a few things. I find it striking. We talked about communication today. Just so that my colleagues are aware on the board how this came about, I was actually out in the public and had a parent take me to task that the board was doing something they had no business doing. And I was like, what are we doing? That's not uncommon, by the way. But they were upset that we were somehow basically substituting e-learning for days. And this was a parent of a struggling student who basically was already concerned, feeling overwhelmed about their ability to help their child, and now feeling like this is now going to put an additional burden on them to meet the e-learning requirements. And I at first, honestly, I thought she was mistaken until she took me or pointed me to the website, and that was the first I heard about it. Now, maybe I missed a meeting, maybe we discussed it, but we would not even be talking about this today if we didn't put a resolution on here, because we've had plenty of opportunities for this to be a discussion item, and it hasn't. I do think, with all due respect to what I've heard of my colleague, I do think it is reasonable to have the legislature weigh in on this for two reasons. One is we're going far beyond the original Flex program that started under the Bennett era, where they were looking at trying to create creative ways to create professional development opportunities. We're getting now into K-12 use of e-learning to count it as an equivalent instructional day, and all I'm saying is from the attendance side, I do think it warrants, for some of the reasons you raised, Carrie, for the legislature to help us define what constitutes a virtual attendance day. That's important, and I think they need to raise those questions. I think there's also a school finance question here, because with all due respect, when we say this is field-driven, I also am aware of districts that are also concerned that they don't have the capacity for this. But if a district decides to not hold school because of inclement weather, they're going to bank tuition support for that day, because the waiver is going to require that they not pay the financial penalty, which is a repayment of that tuition. They're not going to have to do that. They're also not going to be paying bus drivers. They're not going to be running buses. They're not paying aides. They're not paying cooks. And they're hanging on to that. There are districts, though, that will not have that capacity, who are not approved for e-learning, however, that are still paying for 180 instructional days. Now, I don't know how that gets figured out. Thank goodness I'm not in the General Assembly. All I'm saying through the resolution is you're right. We need to hear from the people who are doing it. That's what this resolution calls for. And it doesn't call for districts to come in. If you read the resolution, it's a presentation by the department. And specifically what I would be looking for is asking the department to help us kind of just summarize. It doesn't have to be a lengthy presentation. I'm not looking for 75 slides. I'm looking for something that the board can look at conceptually in January, and more importantly, that the part in the resolution that directs board staff to notify the governor's office that we need legislative direction, I think that's the most critical piece. I think they need a chance. I think If we were unaware of it, I already know, because the day that I found out was real close to the day of organization day, and I was at the State House, and I mentioned this to a couple of lawmakers, and they were clueless what I was talking about. So we're not, it's just something that wasn't put out there. So now that people are becoming aware of it and the discussions happen, it's a good discussion. It's a discussion we need to have happen, especially those of us that believe in e-learning. But I want to see e-learning rolled out appropriately and scaled out in a way that makes sense and it's in the best interest of kids. I know we all want that. Nobody's here being critical of what we're doing, and I'm not trying to take away the hard work that's happened, Candace. I really do appreciate it, and appreciate the districts being here. I think you're going to help lead us in understanding this. But we tend historically to do better in Indiana when we get a policy framework in place so there's sufficient direction given to the field on how to do this well. And that's all I'm looking for here. And so I hope my colleagues will support adopting a resolution that simply says, we're not stopping anything at this point. We're simply saying, let's have a conversation in January and let's get the State House aware of what's at play and let them decide what we need to do. But I would hope that if this passes, Bob, I would hope board staff would relay it's an attendance concern, but it's also, I think, a school funding concern that you'll hear from the field on to some extent about how do we handle that when you're really not operating school that day. So.
Yes, Gordon?
2 points. First, I do feel that the board should be informed on these kind of issues in advance. I think we've had a good discussion about this issue here today, and I think we've raised many issues that need to be addressed by both this board, by the department, as well as the General Assembly. So I would encourage that future policies that are considered to be implemented by the department be fleshed out through the Board of Education. Secondly, I do have some real concerns and am looking for guidance from the legislature and others as to what this policy might look like as it relates to snow days going forward.
Correct.
I have a real concern about the devaluation of the 180-day requirement. I personally would like to see more days. I think we should be encouraging e-learning as part of supplementing students' educations. We should use technology in our educational system here in Indiana as much as we can and be innovative about it. But at the same time, I'm real concerned about using virtual options for snow days as replacements and counting that. Superintendent, I agree 100% that those days are far more important, in February and March than in June. So I think schools can look at other ways to, to make up days earlier, and it can be creative about it. But I do have some concerns about every student in every course, art, shop, choir, etc., having those educational opportunities, that count towards 180 days. Thank you.
Andrea?
I just think we're micromanaging snow days. I think a far more significant debate would be about whether we need a 185 or 190-day school year. We may have no snow this year and it won't even matter. Let's stop telling. I really think that the number of school days is a separate issue from how we handle polar vortex.
I think local districts have done a really good job of being creative in how they handle that within. I wish that, I would be on that leading edge to be that one that was the creative one that could have that one-to-one in a corporation that doesn't have one-to-one. I just don't know how to get that done in the current situation that I'm in. However, I do think that I do value the days, and I do value the days of instructions, because we always say when a kid is absent, a day of absence, you cannot replace what has happened in the classroom that day. And we value that, and I think sometimes we got to think about those things. I really like the idea, but we also got to think about our cohorts. of the 162 days that is required for attendance. We got to be careful about not moving. There's other things that are involved as we look at the A to F down the road.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second before us. Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
No.
Mr. Ellsworth?
Abstain, I'll come back around.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
No.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Pass.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritt?
No.
I'm a yes, thank you.
I'm a yes.
I meant to say pass, I abstained. Brief.
Next item on the agenda is Strategic Planning Committee update and legislative report. That's next, additional guidance.
You must not be controversial. No. You need some controversy.
Did I get recognized?
Yes, go ahead,
Okay,
Gordon.
thank you, Superintendent. Just to report on the, I'll be, I know in the interest of time, I'll be brief. To report on the meeting that occurred on November 13th, 2014 of the Strategic Planning Committee. We looked at a few things during the meeting. Number one, we received an update from the department and board staff on the balanced scorecard. As you will recall, this is a scorecard to guide the work of the department and the SBOE on its strategic plan. It provides metrics to track our progress on the strategic plan, and we are looking to continue to populate the scorecard so that we can have a fully populated scorecard so that we can know where we stand. Secondly, we heard from a number of stakeholders on teacher and principal evaluation systems and stakeholder engagement. We heard comments from Todd Bess of the IASP, from Brian Smith from the ISBA, as well as the national consultant TMTP, who we have retained to provide services on teacher evaluation. We'll be hearing from them shortly, as well as to discuss the Indiana State Board of Education legislative agenda recommendations. So we had a thorough discussion, a good meeting on all of those subjects. So I'd like to turn to the legislative agenda, which is on our agenda today. And I'm looking for my copy. Just bear with me. Had it right here. Here. You got a copy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Today we're going to be considering a legislative agenda for the State Board of Education, recommendations to the General Assembly to consider in the next session. Both Dan Elsner and myself will be meeting with House and Senate leadership later on this month to discuss these recommendations, as well as some of the other legislative agenda items we've discussed today. The first topic, and I'm not going to go through each of them because they are in your board packet, but I do want to address several of them specifically. On teacher evaluations, we recommend the statute clarifies authority of the State Board of Education to approve any version of the state model, as well as establishes appropriate state oversight to ensure compliance of locally developed models. And as well, as I mentioned, we have engaged TNTP to provide some recommendations as to legislative recommendations in the teacher evaluation system here in Indiana, and they're going to make a presentation to us today, so I would call on TNTP at this time.
Gordon, while the TNTP is coming, are you all going to make recommendations for a model, a particular model? Are you making recommendations about components of a teacher evaluation model to the legislature?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. My name's Jessica Conlon. I'm with TNTP. I appreciate you having me here today to speak a little bit about the first phase of our current engagement with the state of Indiana, focused on helping to strengthen the teacher evaluation policies and practices. I'll keep my remarks brief because I know that we are short on time. On a personal note, I have a flight to catch, so I'll try and leave most of the time for questions if you have them. I also believe you've received a memo that outlines this in detail, as well as a hard copy of this presentation. Quickly, an overview. Oops, here's the clicker. An overview of our organization. We have been working we've been working in Indiana for about, TNTP has been working for about 15 years with a focus on teacher evaluation and teacher quality. In many of our engagements, about 24 or so across the country, we've supported districts, states, as well as charter organizations to improve, design, and implement quality teacher evaluation systems. One such engagement was here in Indiana, actually from 2010 through 2012. We supported with the design and implementation of the RISE system. And we're excited to be asked back to support with this reevaluation of the system. We're currently engaged in the first phase of a 3-phase process where we're making initial recommendations around legislative and regulatory policy changes that could be made. A note about these recommendations today: they're initial, and they will be further informed by stakeholder engagement that is currently underway around the state. They're also intended to create the enabling conditions necessary for successful implementation. So they're not going to address all of the potential implementation challenges that states or that the districts and schools may be facing. They're grounded in our deep experience doing this work, as well as national best practices and research. But again, they will be informed by stakeholder engagement around the state. And we expect for them to evolve and for others to potentially emerge over the next few months. I'll start with our regulatory recommendations. To the extent possible, we recommend that the state board take action by rulemaking wherever possible. This will limit the level of prescription in state statute, which tends to hamstring other states when they're trying to address unforeseen challenges in the future. So we've identified 4 areas where we think that the policies could be strengthened or improved. The first is consider defining significantly inform through regulation. Clarify the requirements for ensuring compliance, corporations' compliance with the state compensation models and the criteria for the compensation models. Also, augment the standards for training evaluators, and ensure that the State Board of Education is actually familiar with the assessment guidance as it is produced and rolled out. I'm happy to go through each of these in more detail, but I'm going to move on to the legislative recommendations, and then I'll open it up to your questions.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I have a report in front of me that's dated November 25th, but we just received this yesterday.
The report you received yesterday, but
Yes.
it was dated November 25th. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how the materials have been disseminated to the state board, but it was drafted and the final version was November 25th. So it went out to the board last Wednesday.
Pardon?
These are the documents that went in your binders, are the documents that went out to the board last Wednesday.
Yeah, that was
Right.
right before Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. It's all the same. Okay.
I think they went out last week.
Received this then. I'm just letting you know from my perspective, I haven't had any time to even look at your recommendations.
I apologize for that, and I understand, and I will slow down if that would be helpful, and we can go step by step. We can go through each recommendation in detail if you'd prefer.
Point of order. Are we voting on these recommendations from TNTP today, Gordon, or are we voting on the recommendations of the committee?
It's one and the same.
So if we saw the committee recommendations, they're embedded in this, is that correct?
But we got that last week.
I'm not questioning, I guess my point of order is, are we voting on the committee recommendation today?
No. She's presenting on the work that they are engaged with the committee, and right now, the memo that went out from the committee to the board is what will be the action item. We invited TNTP here to present on the work that they've just started, and they're going to come back in February with final recommendations. Yes, and these were all sent out, including to you, Superintendent Ritz, last Wednesday by Bob Guffin, so they were sent out to every board member last week.
Yeah, I think the intent is just, these are preliminary recommendations for legislative changes to the teacher evaluation system. They're not final, they'll be done in March,
And the committee recommendation is separate as another item?
yes.
So what are we, because TNTP recommendations are listed here specifically. So in your legislative agenda recommendations,
It was sent on the 26th.
It was in our, I think we just received an extra copy of it today.
Is there a motion on the floor?
No.
Oh,
no, there's no motion.
then what are we talking about?
There's no motion.
So is this an overview then?
No, the
Hey,
Gordon, I
No.
know I'm gonna have to leave. I have an appointment today, and I have to travel, so, but there is something on the back, and it's under the A to F accountability. And I would like to make a question and see, there was a comment made that we wanted to have legislation to move the graduation date or the report up months. As an acting principal, I would say no. I do not want that, and here is why. Bringing it up, to me, will change the data that we currently have as graduation data for your school. Because we are allowed to have access until September 30th. It's important to us to get those kids done so they don't have to be a fifth-year senior. And that may be summer school or an online or an e-learning class. It may be something that takes advantage, but I will tell you this, all of the previous data that you have will be thrown away because that will be baseline data and it will be skewed. In a large corporation, it doesn't hurt them. In my corporation, every kid is at least 1%. In a smaller school than mine, everyone's at least 1.5% to 2%. So it's really important that we keep those dates consistent and important to those smaller districts so that they can have the rate correct. And I think it's very important. You know, I understand what the intent is, but pushing it up a couple months is not going to help anything. And I feel that way. And so I just wanted to say that before I have to leave today. But it is listed on the back under legislative modifications, and I think there's other principals in the schools that are not in agreement with that as well.
Troy, if I may, when this was sent out last Monday, and then there was the Principals Association Conference, and there was a session where Steve Baker talked about this, and our staff has since had conversations with him, so we would recommend taking that off the recommendation for right now. It needs further study around what would be possible. The committee was trying to address the desire to get grades out earlier and be reflective of the current year's performance, but there are a number of factors why that's more challenging than it would otherwise appear it should be. So.
Well, I appreciate the time. Thank
It
you.
was well-intentioned, but we will look into that further.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Superintendent, just to answer your question, I think what we would propose doing is striking the language that says TNTP recommendations out of that first page.
Would it be all right to, thank you. So provided an overview of the recommendations we have for making regulatory changes. Legislative action might be necessary in some instances. We've attempted to limit those recommendations where possible. I believe you've heard some of those already today from Mr. Henry, but they include creating structures to ensure consistent level of quality in plan adoption and plan implementation across all corporations. Clarify the role of teachers in developing locally created or modified plans. Clarify the state board's role in making changes to the state model plan. Addressing the perceived negative impact that preventing salary increases for teachers who are rated improvement necessary. So we have some options there for alternative processes. And then finally, supporting teachers' understanding of their corporation's evaluation plan by requiring training of teachers in addition to evaluators. That is the high level of our initial recommendations. Again, these will be informed by stakeholder engagement with a variety of stakeholders, educators and practitioners, as well as members of state agencies and partners around the state. I'm happy to speak or take questions or talk in more detail about any or all of these policies. Yes.
I have a question for Gordon, sorry. And I apologize because I should ask you this. I had a little bit of a traffic accident the day that we were discussing this, and I got there right at the end of this. Did the committee actually, before I got there, did we actually vote this out of committee, or is this still an in-play document? I just want to make sure it was voted out of committee.
What document is that?
The TNTP recommendations.
No,
No.
it was not.
Okay, so this is something that the committee, because I'm looking at it, I had a couple questions, but I wasn't sure. So I don't want to go too far in the public meeting in here if we're still fleshing this out in committee.
Sure.
I guess
Right.
is what I'm asking.
And Brad, I noticed your copy, which was part of my issue. I couldn't access the report because it wouldn't print all of the information. And if you look carefully at even the front page, it's missing whole sentences, parts of sentences, bullet points. It was unreadable.
Yeah, I had a readable
So,
copy. I worked from in my electronic
We just
folder.
got them available to us today, and we passed them out to you.
We have to pass it first, then we'll read it.
Oh, I was able to see it on the 26th in that comment, so I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Well, and I'm just looking in my packet right now. I think I printed out another copy, but in my packet right here, I've got pages 4, 6, 8, 10, and I'm missing pages, so just.
It was,
Like I said, you have to pass it.
we couldn't look at it until today.
Yeah.
That's when we got printed copies, and we put them at your place.
Sorry for our technical difficulties.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's important that you have all the information in front of you. And again, these are just initial recommendations. I don't believe anything is on the floor for adoption
You're right.
today.
No, it's there.
They're all there.
I think it's there.
You're right.
Yeah, we gave you a new copy.
No, this was in the book, and it was in the,
So do you have a motion, Gordon?
No, I don't. Because we're actually going to go through several of these. So we were just going to hear from TNTP and then go through some of the other recommendations.
We're taking action on your recommendations today, are we not?
Yes.
Okay, do you have
Yes.
a motion?
No, I don't. We haven't concluded with TNTP yet.
Oh, I thought she
so-
concluded, so sorry.
It's open to questions at this point, I
Okay,
think.
I
If you
thought
have
you concluded.
specific questions about the policy recommendations, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Well, despite the confusion, let me just say, I really appreciate your time and what TNTP is doing to help us here in Indiana on the teacher evaluation system. I think, there have been a number of problems with our evaluation system, and that's reflected in the extremely low number of teachers that were deemed ineffective. I think it was 2% under the prior evaluation system, as well as the survey of teachers that was conducted by SEL at Indiana University, which demonstrated a low degree of confidence that teachers currently have in the current evaluation system. So I think we need to look at all of those with your help and make some recommendations to the legislature in coming months as to how we might improve the educational or the evaluation system here in the state of Indiana.
Absolutely. And we're actually, a colleague of mine and I are speaking with Drs. Murphy and Cole tomorrow morning. And we're hoping to build off of some of their findings in our stakeholder engagement discussions.
I would just endorse TNTP as an organization. We work closely with Marion University. And some of their, really in the nation, you're doing some of the great work. So I think we're with the right folks. We're going to have to do a lot of development with principals and teachers, frankly, because they want confidence in the administrators can work with it well. This is a little bit like the turnaround effort, where we've launched, we're going the appropriate direction, and now we have to refine and trim sails and get a little better
Right.
at it and do a lot more training. But we're really heading down the right direction. I appreciate Strategic Planning Committee keep us on this. 5-10 years out, this is a difference maker, but we'll have to work hard at it.
One quick question. On the decision on what it means to significantly inform, is that made by the SBOE?
Well, currently, the language that evaluation plans have to be significantly informed by objective measures of student data, that language is in statute. However, it's within the SBOE's authority to make rules to define that phrase.
Okay, so do you have a recommended definition?
Our recommendation is that there be a range, a minimum and a maximum. There's really a sweet spot of percentages that a teacher evaluation system should include objective measures, and it shouldn't be too low or too high.
And what is that range?
Research shows that it tends to be between 33 and 50%, but again, that's something that we're, should be open for discussion and with stakeholders around the state.
And again, this is just a preliminary recommendation. There's going to be much further conversation and study in coming months.
Okay. Well, we will have an update, a written update at the December Strategic Planning Committee meeting, and we'll be back in February with our final recommendations.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I think the other couple items that I want to address would be number one, pre-K, which is on page 3. And first of all, I just want to say, generally speaking, obviously in our state and our city, we've recently seen a significant pre-K measure passed by the City County Council of Indianapolis. And I think this was a significant step forward for education in our state. And it was bipartisan. Mayor Ballard showed tremendous leadership in pushing it forward, in addition to city council members on both sides of the aisle, and with the substantial support of leading corporations and philanthropic organizations in our city, namely Eli Lilly and Co. So I personally would like to publicly thank all of those people and many others unnamed for their leadership in a $40 million program that's going to provide quality pre-K education to low-income children in our city, 1,300 of them every year, 3- and 4-year-olds. Just a tremendous step forward for education in our state. So I'd like to publicly recognize them. But secondly, recognize the work of our governor as well as our legislature, which last year, as we all know, adopted a pilot program for our state for pre-K for 5 counties, which will serve here in Marion County 800 students on a yearly basis. And I just want to commend them as well for their leadership in the pre-K effort. I know it was hard for them to get done, and there was a lot of political capital spent to get that done. So again, I think we are making progress on this issue in the state, and personally I would like to see more progress, and I think that's part of that's contained in the recommendations before us. I'd also like to say, in my view, it's not only an educational issue, it's an economic development issue. Companies that are considering our state look at education and workforce, the skills of our workforce as one of the most important issues in making a location decision. So we also know that there's that pre-K education reduces healthcare costs, reduces welfare costs. It reduces the need for as much special education. It reduces crime and incarceration and increases productivity and tax revenues for our state. And it does, again, like I said, have a huge impact on our workforce development. Pre-K is so important in giving kids a step up in their education. And especially these programs addressing low-income kids. According to the Annie Casey Foundation, 32% of children in Indianapolis, our capital city, live in poverty, and 22% of children live in poor families, below 100% of the federal poverty level. So these programs are reaching kids who desperately need a step up in life. So I just want to say that we're obviously making recommendations as to pre-K. I would encourage the legislature to listen to the chambers of commerce who represent the business community in the state, listen to educators who strongly support these programs, and follow the lead of Mayor Ballard and the leaders in the city of Indianapolis who have advanced the cause of pre-K in the state of Indiana. And I don't know if anyone else has any comments specifically as to pre-K before we move on. Tony?
Yeah, I do, and I'm really glad to see that the committee's taking that up, because the fact of the matter is, right now, by national standards, Indiana's ranking about last in terms of our commitment, financing toward pre-K. I mean, we've, in the last year, dipped below Mississippi, who we were competing with for last. And just by way of comparison, a state like West Virginia they fund their pre-K from state funds at a level of $167 million. Now, we aren't even in the right ballpark here. As far as I can count, we have committed about $5 million last session to pre-K. We are not in the game, and we have to, because everything that we're trying to do here will essentially, be deterred if we are not getting kids into the classrooms and educated at the pre-kindergarten level. So, I mean, it's very unfortunate, I think personally, the decision that was made not to apply for the federal funds that could have been potentially $20 million a year over 4 years, when the state commitment's only at $5 million. And we need to just pull our head out of the sand and realize that this is ground zero of improving education in this state. Thank you.
The only thing I wanted to add to the comment on preschool is that, we are piloting it right now, but I would still say, as we look at that, not just from funding, but I hope legislatively we look at the continuum to make sure that we make it a smooth transition into kindergarten and that it's seamless. Because the worst thing you can do is provide high-quality preschool experience, completely disconnected from K-12. They end up enrolling into kindergarten, and we don't share that data, and we're starting the wheel all over again. And I've seen this even as a building principal, even with the existing Head Start programs. If we can make the communication seamless at the transition for a child from a high-quality pre-K experience into the K-12, we will actually see, I believe, we'll see what other states are seeing in terms of the number of students going on, graduating on time, meeting standards, closing the achievement gap faster. We will see those same kind of things here. I absolutely believe that.
Other comments before your motion?
Well, and I'll just echo that as well, and just say that I think, again, we're doing it deliberately in the state of Indiana. We are taking our time. I hope we use that time to really think about what steps we might take in future years to take a national leadership position on pre-K, because, again, I think it is one of the most important issues facing the state. And it's a real opportunity, I think, from members of both sides of the aisle to get their heads together on a key issue for our kids. So with that, I'm going to make a motion to approve the recommendations that are contained in our packets, striking the language on page 1 relating to TNTP recommendations, as well as striking the legislative modification last bullet point regarding the timeline that we discussed already. And with that, make my motion.
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert? Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Riddle?
No. Evansville, you have been very patient. We are to the point in the agenda, oh no, we aren't, excuse me. We have one additional new business item. New A to F model language. Claire and Debbie, I believe we just have a few decisions left.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. As you know, our timeline is such that we have to bring language to you that you need to approve in January in order to stay on track with the rulemaking timeline, start the public hearings, get a final rule published in time for the start of the next school year. So we wanted to bring back to you the decisions and guidance you've made to us at the last 2 board meetings, confirm with you that these reflect the conversation we had, the guidance you've given to us, and there's still a few more areas where we need your guidance in order to craft rule language. We are going to try to work hard with Debbie and department attorneys as well as our attorneys and staff to get you draft rule language in the next couple of weeks so that you have ample time to review, since there's not going to be time to go back and forth like we did on REPA. So that will be our goal, that you have at least a couple weeks to review it before the January 7th meeting. So just to recap, guidance from the 10-15 meeting, I'll just briefly touch on this again. Again, the board said they preferred a weighting of 60% proficiency, 40% growth. The grade distributions, we showed you.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Steve Baker asked for some, to speak to this, at this item.
Okay.
So sorry.
But you know what, Claire, you're on a roll. As long as I get to talk before any action is taken, I'm
Okay.
fine with that. I don't want to interrupt Claire.
All right, no problem.
The grade distribution, we showed you what the distribution has been like. I think it was since 2005. There's a slide at the tail end of the deck here, and you affirmed where option D2 was in terms of the distribution. Multiple measures, although you had encouraged us and the panel to take a look at multiple measures, agreed with the panel's conclusion that having fewer focused objective measures that could be uniformly tracked and measured across school corporations around the state was the right way to go. Moving on to the last meeting where we had Dr. Benner here to present on growth. You affirmed to us the need to have a coherent systemic approach to growth, since it's used throughout our accountability systems for schools, for teacher evaluations, for charter schools, et cetera. You also affirm the need to implement a methodology that's flexible enough to withstand all the changes that are forthcoming with our assessment system. You affirm the need to address the demand we heard loudly and clearly from stakeholders to know what the individual growth targets are for each student at the start of the school year versus at the end of the school year. And then you also supported the panel's recommended approach of baseline referenced student growth percentiles, which will allow us to set ambitious yet achievable individualized growth targets for each student. And then you also affirm the desirability of using the combination of norm and criterion reference growth for calculating this growth, which is recommended to us by both Dr. Benner and affirmed by Dr. Briggs. We also talked at the last meeting about the transition timeline. And you acknowledge the transition we're facing, just like every other state around the country that's going to more rigorous standards and aligned assessments. The first most obvious is that we have a new vertical scale when you have a new assessment, so we break from the old scale, which has some challenges when you're trying to calculate growth. Experts have recommended a minimum of 3 years and a preference of 4 years for establishing stable baseline matrices using the baseline referenced SGP model, but we did present to you 2 options, and you selected one for how we manage the transition. And up here you chose option 2, which was utilizing the 2 years of norm referenced SGPs, and provide an estimated individual growth target at the start of the school year, validate that at the end of the school year, and make adjustments as necessary. That will be necessary for at least 1, possibly 2 years. And then you affirm the critical importance of clear and frequent communication to schools, families, stakeholders as we're going through this transition. So this is not just a one-time email blast or presentation. This is going to take a pretty coordinated effort. Finally, we talked a little about the timeline, just to remind everybody that the current A through F model is being applied again for this year, the 14-15 school year, and those grades will not come out. They'll be a little bit later next year because we have to determine the cut scores for the new modified test that's being administered this spring. So it's going to be more like November, December, that the grades for 14-15 will be released using the current A through F model for the last time. And then assuming you approve final language on the timeline we're about to talk about, the first time the new model will be applied would be in the 15-16 school year, and we'd have those grades released November or December of 2016. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. Again, looking for affirmation from you that this reflects the guidance that you've given to us, as we're on a very tight timeline with draft and rule language for you.
Are you wanting to take a vote on that now, or are you wanting to finish up pieces?
We could do that,
need?
sure. I had asked the superintendent just to get an action from you so it was clear for the record where the guidance was from the board. So we could either do it at the end or break it up into parts. It's up to you.
Is there a comment somebody wants to make?
Yeah, I thought Steve was going to weigh in before we voted on anything.
He wants to talk about CCR, I believe. Yes? So that's coming up next.
Yeah, it's not coming up yet.
We're just looking out for you, Steve.
Yeah, David?
Claire, I have a motion on this to approve.
David had a question.
I have a clarifying question. I understand we have to come up with one letter grade, and we talked about having a separate score for growth, one for proficiency. And it's my understanding that on the report card that schools get, there'll be a separate indicator for each. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is the intention. That's correct. That is the intention on the display side of it, to ensure that that data is displayed separately as well as the final aggregated score.
I think that's wonderful. Is there going to be any other diagnostic information released to schools in addition to that growth score and that proficiency score?
What other information would you have in mind?
I think you're talking about
We do-
assessment.
Assessment
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of data, so all that assessment data would be aligned with those scores. So a school corporation, if they want to dig deeper into why they received those particular letter grades, there's enough information on the report card to them that they'll be able to do that.
Sure, and I think there's a couple different levels here. First is the external, outward-facing public level, as well as the internal, secure level in which there's more extensive student-level detail, and that they can drill into that student information to be able to see that type of information in more detail. In addition, we also have other reports, such as the APR Annual Performance Report, which has a lot of detailed information on that as well. The statistics the metrics are slightly different, but are outlined in statute, of what would be displayed on that as well.
A lot of work's been done over many months with a lot of experts, and I know both of you worked tremendous hours. It's really appreciated. I'm fine with this conceptually and look forward to the final language.
So there's a motion to approve the guidance that has been presented to you so far on weighting growth and proficiency, grade distributions, multiple measures, growth methodology selection, managing the transition, and the information that's under current model final year and the new model's first year. So that's the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert? Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritt?
Yes.
Great, and it might be a good time for Steve to talk now.
Yes, Steve, you may speak now.
I think this happened at the last board meeting too. I apologize. I have this way of interrupting, so, but thank you for hearing me. I do appreciate it. I know it's been a long day for you. I'll get right to the point. November 21 through 25, IASP had our principals, assistant principals conference. Over 900 principals were there. That's a record for us on both levels. Debbie Daly, thank you, Debbie, gave 2 days up of her time to come present with me. And we presented 4 times to over 200 assistant principals and principals the new A to F accountability framework, kind of generally speaking of what the board, we presented the board from the panel. The sessions were very comprehensive and a lot of good questions were asked. And IASP wants to continue to help communicate that. So when you're talking about communicating that to stakeholders, we want to be part of that. I already have 4 requests, East Allen and up by Jimtown and some other places that we're going to continue to go out and present this for people who couldn't be at the conference, and we're happy to do so. One thing that was brought up as part of this that I know Claire will be getting to is the CCR portion, and specifically what I talked about last time, which is what percent is the mark of getting your full 4 points, which will now be 100 points in the new system. It's a big deal because 30% of our grade right now will be attributed to that. So I wanted to say one more time and give you an update. I brought this up to every session in every time that we presented, and I wanted you to hear feedback from the principals, their concerns. Here were their concerns, and it's basically what I said to you last time, was there is frustration with the ability to expand dual credit offerings. I know you can do IB, which is very, very small part of the CCR. I know you can do AP, again a smaller amount, industrial certification. Dual credit is the largest amount. And principals are frustrated because higher ed, it's very difficult to get our newer teachers credentialed. Masters for teachers anymore is not an incentive. You don't get a pay raise for it. Our younger teachers are not getting masters. That is required by most higher ed institutions to be credentialed for dual credit. So I see, Claire will have a slide for you, and it's an accurate slide. I see that percent that is shown. I think it'll go down because as our veteran teachers retire, our newer teachers are not being credentialed. That's a problem. Principals are frustrated that we want to get more dual credit offerings, but we're not able to. Also, they said the same thing as far as parents and students signing up. We want them to sign up. That's their decision, not ours. There's a cost involved that affects especially our higher at-risk population. And then there's also a possibility in the future that a test like AccuPlacer might be used to say you have to score so high on that in order to even be eligible for dual credit. That happens already in some cases, like with Ivy Tech. So all that I am asking is that we examine that very carefully before, on paper, if I were looking at it, I'd say, well, obviously we need to move the 25%. It makes sense. 82% of the schools obtain that. I'm just saying, please, if we could look at that carefully and study it thoroughly, because I don't believe that number will stay there, and I think it's going to be harder and harder for us to have teachers licensed in dual credit. So I'm okay with the idea of raising it, but how much and how fast? I would just hope that we look at that carefully, and we want to be a resource for you as we go through that. Yes, sir.
Steve, we don't have much time. I'm just going to plant this idea and come back. Professional development funds, in my humble opinion, should be invested in teachers that want to get master's degrees in content areas so they can do it. In addition to that, I think you really need to work with universities on blended. We talked about e-learning today.
Mm-hmm.
PhDs in physics and chemistry and everything else can work with a high school teacher and have the instructor of credit be the university. I mean, there's ways to do this. It'll take investment, but the quality way to do it is to invest in our educators to get these master's degrees, and there's got to be some joint effort in there. I think if you open that discussion up with districts, that might be the better route. Because we need that kind of expertise, frankly, in the high
We
schools.
truly do. Just to give you 2 great examples to address that, I have a German teacher who teaches at a university at night, yet they did not dual credit credential him to teach it in my high school.
Maybe
That makes
you
no
did
sense.
university, you better call me.
That makes no sense. And the other one is, I have another teacher. I have a chemistry teacher who teaches AP and has one of the highest scores in the state of Indiana, yet I can't get her dual credential because she doesn't meet the qualifications. She does in AP, but she doesn't in dual credit. So just so many difficult and obstacles to overcome that we're trying to do. We're just, again, these things are beyond our control, and we wish we had more
Sit
control.
down, maybe get a group to work with.
That'd be
us.
great.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I just want to see if you agree with my conclusion. If we were to nudge that CCR readiness weighting higher, do you agree with my impression that that would be an additional deterrent for students to take and schools to offer electives that receive no reward from the formula?
That's a very interesting point. I guess my phrase would be you pay attention to what gets graded sometimes, and dual credit courses are part of our grade. The fine arts are not in a lot of areas, and if, as a principal, I have to choose, I don't want to, but I could see that as a possibility, yes, that dual credit courses are valued in our grading system.
And AP.
And AP and IB, yes.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you.
No, it's no problem. Great, well, that's a great segue into the last components where we would like your guidance before bringing you some rule language in January. So we had started but hadn't finished the multiple measures, and in fact, the testimony from the general comments this morning from the Indiana STEM Commission or Coalition is actually a good reminder that we believe that the U.S. Department of Education may be thinking of, doing more with science in terms of accountability. We don't have any specific guidance to that effect, but there was some chatter about that among states. There's also the feedback we heard this morning that science should be offered, grades 3 through 10 was their recommendation, and be included in our accountability system. So we wanted to make sure that this board was weighing in on that. There could be a couple of ways of handling it. One could be, no, not right now. It could be a commitment to come back and look at it. You could put in a structure in place in the rule to say we'll consider it down the road or something like that. Or you could say go ahead and do it. That was not what the panel recommended. Then the other was, we had talked about aligning our accountability system with the balanced scorecard and our strategic plan, and I read 3 was one of the metrics, which was also discarded by the panel, so we wanted to make sure we just brought that full circle to you before we go any further with the rule. And then Superintendent Ritz had talked last time about states around the country talking about other ways you can be holding schools accountable using school improvement credits or on track for graduation and compliance indicators. So we wanted to have a final conversation on other measures before we continue further with this.
Tony?
Yeah, I read 3, I think, should definitely be included in the elementary school metrics. For example, we had down at Glenwood Leadership Academy, had their I read 3 scores been included in their grade this year, they would have been a C school.
How do you know that? I mean, how
The
could?
principal told me.
But there's no weighting of it. There's no calculation of it. I don't know.
Well,
how
I'm
they
just
weigh
saying,
in.
my general point is it should be included. I'm going to take her at her word as to how she figured that out.
It is a critical pathway to success. That's why we made such a commitment to it, at least years ago on the board. We thought it was correlated to, it's a little bit Gordon's point on preschool. You've got to stick with it. It's a critical path. I don't know how to do it.
I think it'd be pretty difficult to try to figure out what the weighting would be for one grade for one assessment piece amongst an entire school that serves more than 3rd grade. Go ahead, Carrie.
I was going to mention the science. We've put out an RFP for assessments, and it doesn't include science in all of the grades, only in, again, certain grades, and so then you run into the same thing. I mean, we currently assess science just in
Yeah,
certain grades,
you're
and
right. Our
so-
original resolutions did not call for I-STEP assessments for science.
And so if we use the current
How-
system, it's like I read, then we run into, we only have it at certain grade levels.
And
and stuff,
that
so
was my point.
That then
that it-
becomes,
How do you figure out what the weight is and what would the appropriate weight be for one test at one grade level? And then, in addition, I will say to the science that we did, through the RFP though, have science as a possible assessment through the formative for the options that the schools have. So we do have, through the RFP, we're looking at formative assessments, not the final step, but in 4 subjects. So that would be, so that's an option that may be considered, just
And those
to
4
continue
are?
those. Social studies, science, and language arts and mathematics.
I join my colleagues on the iRead issue. I think it should be part of it. For this reason, yes, it is one assessment at one grade level, but passing iRead 3 is really a key indicator of future success in school. If you can't read at the end of grade 3, then you're going to have all sorts of problems throughout. So my notion is that, yes, it impacts an entire elementary school. And in grades 1 and 2, those are the lead up to a child being able to read at grade 3. So I joined at least 2 of the colleagues, maybe 3, that was talking about iRead 3, and we just need to find a way to put that indicator in would be my recommendation. I don't believe that just because it's hard to do, to find a weighting and so forth, that we shouldn't do it. I think it's the right thing to do. And therefore, I would ask if there's support from fellow board members that we do have that in there. I think it's so critical that students be able to read at the end of grade 3. It's going to drive their entire career, not only in middle school, high school, but probably for the rest of their lives. And so it's that essential for me.
Sarah?
You said that the panel had discarded the idea of iRead 3. Can you summarize some of the rationale behind that decision?
Because it's only administered in 1 grade and you couldn't calculate growth. And right now there's the optional iRead in K1 and 2, but there are no cut scores, so you can't, I don't believe, so there's no way to do growth on a scale like you can with the iStep. And because the panel gave greater value to growth than to proficiency, that was how they landed there.
Are we prohibited from having a proficiency-only assessment?
No.
No.
I think my only concern, I mean, I get the logic, but I think my only concern is by including it, you're basically introducing yet another exam. And I think part of what the subcommittee was looking at is how can we streamline some of this. I guess the question I have is with regard to other measures, have we thought about the impact of that? And that I don't want to see us create atypical situations because we keep trying to put more things into the mixer. So with where we're at right now, that aside, that's in the parking lot, with what we have right now, do we have a pretty clean pathway to achieving a proficiency score and a growth score?
Well, we do, and one of the reasons why this was brought up is because in high school you have multiple measures, more than just the ECA. You also have graduation and CCR. In elementary, we tried to find other items, but really only stuck with growth and proficiency on iStep. Right. And so that was why this was one of the items that the panel looked at, but like I mentioned, decided not to go with.
And we need to have some study on that. It's an important component.
I mean, it's ridiculous
But
to measure it just on one measure.
There's not much out there because it becomes very subjective when you get into some other measures as to how you quantify it, how you monitor it, how you make sure that it's valid. And so as much as we want to do it and jump into it, we also want to see what's out there and how are people doing it and what does it look like and how can we quantify things.
But superintendent, it's no more subjective than saying that we're going to judge a school on their ISTEP scores on just one measure.
Oh, you're talking
That's
to
totally
you're talking to somebody who totally agrees. I do not believe that
So-
test scores tell the story about a school.
So the idea we can't come up
I
with some
agree.
multiple metrics for elementary school, I just don't accept that.
What would be the consequences of putting some more study on this and that later?
We could do that. One of the recommendations that you just voted on from the Strategic Planning Committee was adding emergency rule language to get through the transition. So that would be an option. The board can take it up in another year or 2 if you wanted to.
Even though you can't study growth on this situation, having a focus of a principal and their teachers and parents and everybody on getting this iRead 3 score up where you want it has a lot of merit because it is a critical path.
Okay.
I just don't know at this point if you can toss it in there, not toss it, but place it in there at this point. I just think we need to think it through a bit. Feels like tossing.
So I hear some consensus around studying multiple measures.
Sounds
Yes?
like, I think there were two strong, yes,
there a
let's include
second?
it.
Absolutely.
Is there a second?
So if we study it, does that eliminate it?
Oh, going forward? No.
So,
I think practically it would not be included in year one, 15, 16, but you could leave the door open to add it.
so that's the consequence. Year one, it wouldn't be in there.
Or we could have a compressed time to study it and bring something back before the rules finalized during the public hearing process.
Or could we implement it with it in and then examine it the first year? So we have something to examine
Mhm.
versus trying something out without it and then saying, wonder what it would be like with it. Why not do it the first year, study it the first year, and then if it's problematic, come back the second year and either eliminate it if it isn't working or continue it. That seems to be common sense to me.
Sarah?
I think we're in an interesting kind of jurisdiction of things going on at the same time. We have new assessments coming through, and right now, we don't know what that new iRead 3 is going to look like. We don't know what iStep is going to look like. My preference would be for us to not include it for the first year, but to study it to see what we end up with as a result of the assessment RFP, and then to have that emergency rule language so that it can be added down the line if we feel that that would be an appropriate
I
choice.
support Sarah's position.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Okay.
You just nailed
So that's only regarding iRead 3, so
Right.
are you wanting to study the rest? I mean, you wanting to study other options?
Science and others.
I'm not opposed to it.
Oh.
I'm not opposed, I think that's the right answer. I'm not opposed to it either, but I think we would be wise right now, for the reasons Sarah just expressed, to start with what we do know, study it in the interim, and ramp up from there, and we can make some decisions along the way. But right now, we're still working through what the test is gonna be.
We got a lot of.
So Sarah, if I heard you correctly, you're wanting to not include other measures at this time.
Right. But I reserve the right to do so
But
later.
steady-
Sure, okay, well, then, okay.
And
Is
that's-
there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion?
I support the wisdom of my colleagues, so I'll back off on my proposal and feel, I think you're right. I think we have so much on our plate right now. It's getting so complicated. This process has been so complicated. Some of the meetings we've had have been at a higher level, especially with the consultants coming in. And then the assessment component is on top of that. And some of us think the assessment should have come first and then these kinds of things. So I think we're doing it backwards. So it's an evolutionary process. So that's fine too.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Elsner,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry,
Yes.
Ms. Neal,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Walker, Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
Yes. Next
Great.
one is on graduation.
Yep, and I'll
Waiting.
turn over to Debbie.
Thank you. So one other component that was recommended for inclusion within the accountability framework is to reward schools for out-of-cohort graduates. So currently, we use the 4-year graduation rate translated into points for graduation. Previously, in the current model, there was a movement to use the 5-year graduation rate as we proceeded with that set of rules. So the panel wanted to take a look at what other measures could be used to, again, award schools for those out-of-cohort graduates. We took a look at various options, such as a membership to graduation ratio, et cetera. And the panel landed on 5-year graduation rate again. So in front of you, you were actually mailed a 5-year graduation rate outcome sheet, which you can see a few various options that the panel reviewed for 5-year graduation rates. The 3 options that were available is first a straight average of the 4-year graduation rate, 5-year graduation rate. You can see the outcome of what that looks like to scores when we did it that way. Option number 2 is a 4-year graduation rate plus a 5-year delta rate. What this actually means is taking a look at one year prior again, taking a look at the difference between the 4-year rate and the 5-year rate in that year, adding that delta to the current 4-year rate to come up with a final graduation rate. Finally, option number 3 was a 4-year adjusted numerator and denominator to include those out-of-cohort graduates. So in other words, we're starting with the 4-year graduation rate, If there are 2 students that were 5-year graduates, we add them to both the numerator and denominator to come up with an alternate rate to be used in accountability. The accountability panel suggested using option number 2. This is the 5-year delta. Again, this is taking the difference between the 4-year and the 5-year rate in the previous cohort year and appending that to the 4-year rate. So we just wanted confirmation that the board wanted to proceed with that option and using that information in the new system.
And Steve Baker could attest that we had a lot of dialogue about this. And the best way to accomplish that, the goal of the panel was really to give credit to schools for graduating students in that 5th year. So do we have a recommendation to take the panel's, I guess we would have a motion to take the panel's recommendation regarding 5-year graduation rates to be factored into the model.
So moved.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Elson. Dr. Freitas.
Yes.
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Ms. Neal.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien.
Yes.
Dr. Oliver.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
No.
Mr. Watts.
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker.
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
Yes. The next one is the weight. What weight should be given to college and career readiness indicators?
So I think the easiest is to show you the chart, because you've heard from Steve last meeting and this meeting again about views from the Principals Association members about their concerns with dual credit. As you can see on the far left there, and actually, Debbie, really, you put this together. Do you want to talk about it?
Sure. So on your far left, you can see 25%. This is the current goal. You can see the number of schools that actually achieve the full 4 points in the current system. We're looking at 82% of schools achieve that full 4 points. That means that they are at or above the 25% mark. So as we move across these columns, you can see at the 30 mark where that point breakout would actually be at 30% as the goal. 75.8% of schools are at or above that 30% mark. 33.3%. 71.2% of schools are at above that mark. 40% were at 58.8. And finally, 50% currently have 40.6% of schools at or above the 50% mark. That's 50% of their graduates achieving a college and career readiness indicator. Now, as Steve noted earlier, there's likely some considerations to be given for increasing that to 30, 33%, or even higher.
One thing I wanted to mention, the panel initially started out by saying that should be 100%, because if we're truly finding ways to measure college and career readiness, that should apply to every graduate from high school. And then the further we got into it and looked at and discarded other indicators, that's how the panel decided to stay at the 25%. One thing, and I'm looking at a note that you made here, and it was in the draft rule language you got, we have talked about military entrance exams and other indicators that are used and acceptable to indicate readiness for career and or college level work. So wanted to at least have that dialogue with you. There's a dual credit concern that we heard from Steve. Are there other indicators we could consider that would make that more reasonable? And given that you've got 82% not only reaching it but achieving, going above that 25%, is that too high of a bar or too low of a bar?
Can I jump in on that? I would be hesitant to assume that because it's been too high right now, that's going to remain the case. I suspect we're going to get a real wake-up call once we really move to a true CCR measure. I think some districts are ready for it. I think other districts, for whatever reason, back when we started looking at college and career readiness and talking actively about upgrading the standards, I'm not sure they're quite there yet, and I think their first round in the test is going to be a real wake-up call that they've got some room. I don't know if that'll be true. So what I'm wondering is would it not be reasonable right now, given all the same unknowns, stay at 25%, let's evaluate it. I may be wrong, but I think statutorily, there wouldn't be any reason why the board couldn't come back at some point and entertain a recommendation to increase it at some point once we get on the other side of this test, because I think right now, all we're gonna do is inject more anxiety than what's currently already out there about the unknown of the test, which I don't think is necessary. I think we can leave it at 25. We already know, I think most people understand that when we go to a CCR test, different style question, different level of higher order reasoning, I think it's a reasonable expectation there's going to be an adjustment period. And I'd like to see where we're at 25% on the other side of 2015-16. That would be my recommendation.
Well, are the test scores reflected in the CCR grade?
Only insofar as if you graduate with a diploma, you need to
Okay.
have passed the ECAs.
Okay, so I favor keeping it at 25%, because all that does reflect is dual credit, IB, AP, and industrial certification. That's a very limiting definition of college and career readiness. So anything that would deter students from taking or schools from offering the whole panoply of rich electives, I think would be a mistake. So for that reason, I think the 25% is a good place to go. Now, adding measures such as a military entrance exam, that's an entirely different matter. If we can add college and career ready measures, I would support that and possibly moving the figure up.
Okay, if I could interject on this, you'll notice in the recommendation coming from the accountability panel that very much reflects both of your input of leaving it at 25% now, but continuing to explore additional measures or indicators for college and career readiness. We did engage with DWD as well as SHE to have discussions on some other potential indicators. However, we were not able to land on any indicators. So that is part of the recommendation from the panel, is to continue to review those indicators and possibly expand that list. Now, around the recommendations and how it's included in the accountability system, we're very strategic on how we actually put this into the system. We've recommended that we take the actual percent and use a multiplier to get to points, so that we may change that multiplier or change that goal without a rewrite of the rules. So for example, at 25% goal, our multiplier is 4. We're just taking the actual percent. Let's say a school had 20% college career ready, multiplying it times 4 to get to the points of 80. If we raise that to 33.3%, then we're just using a multiplier of 3, for example, so that we can make those adjustments within the system, knowing that we did want to continue to review those potential indicators in the future and possibly make that adjustment.
Is it possible to write it in the rule that we start with 25% year 1, year 2, it ramps it up to 30%, and then in year 3 we study it, so it automatically goes up 5%? I hesitate at having a 25% rate as a leading policy body of the state of Indiana. I'd like to create some momentum, some growth. So would it be possible to write the rule that way if we were to vote it year 1, 25%, year 2, 30%?
It's definitely possible. I think we definitely want to engage in some of those reviews and those studies of what other indicators could be included before we would define what that would ramp up to.
As it's currently written, unless I'm mistaken, it's been at 25%, and then we've reviewed it.
Correct.
Each time. So I'd be more comfortable with saying, after the first year, we're going to review it and see if we should increase it.
Can I piggyback off that? Because I agree, and my concern on that is if we went there, because I get where you're going and I agree with you, but my concern is that we would just be arbitrarily picking a number out of the air because we don't know the assessment yet. If we give the assessment, we can study it rather than saying, okay, well, now we're going to go from 25 to whatever the new number is. There would at least be a logic that we could go out and explain why we raised it the way we raised it, because there's a data trail. So my concern is now trying to anticipate that. We're
The
just
assessment's not reflected in that, though.
I understand that, but still, even so, you're still throwing a number at the dartboard
Well,
and
I
saying
agree with that,
arbitrarily it's
yeah.
What's special about 30?
But
What's
we
special?
may decide in a year that we do want the assessments to count.
Absolutely, and that's all part of studying it and getting on the other side of the test. So to me, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but the logic ought to be, what is the minimum ground rules we need to get lift? And once we start flying this with a new assessment, then we can see some data come in and start making some decisions. Because I think Dr. Freitas is right. I do think we have an obligation to come back and look at it. And I would hope we're not setting the box here today and saying, well, we're staying with this forever. I think it's getting us off the ground, see where we're at, and do what we do well, which is come back and evaluate it.
The other factor is, and it's not for today, but it's a logical flaw I think we continue to make, is we set public policy based on the percentage of schools who are either going to pass or fail. And we really should be setting expectations based on expectations. So we look at an assessment and say based on the assessment, this is where schools need to be, versus we look at the percentage of schools who are gonna pass or fail. So if we look at some of the assessments we do, we have study groups for reliability and validity and so forth, but somehow that never translates to some policy decisions we make. We get to look at these charts. And all I'm saying, it's a flaw, it's a logical flaw that we make policy decisions based on percentage of schools that are failing or passing. That 82% might be right on, or it may be way off, but we're basing it on an indicator that's really not a valid one. So
Well, and who's to say what percentage of students should be in an IB program or be taking AP courses? There's a lot of evidence that students are being pushed into AP who shouldn't be taking AP courses because the schools get rewarded for that, and they get money for it. So, I mean, there are an awful lot of issues rolled up into that, and I say that's one reason to stick with the 25%.
Yeah, you know, for IRE 3, we don't look at all the IRE 3 scores across the state and then say, well, we think 80% of the students should be able to pass that. We have other indicators. All I'm saying is we need to make the best decisions, and in addition to maybe the percentage of schools who pass, we need to look at other indicators. It's too important just to leave it up to that one indicator.
So I hear perhaps a motion that indicates we want to stay at 25% for the first year, and then the year after that, we want to look at are there other measures of college and career readiness, and if we want to increase the percentage towards those measures. Is there a second? Any more discussion? Roll
Yeah,
call?
I would just add,
sorry,
I think
Tony.
that foreign language proficiency should be added as an indicator.
And I think civic knowledge and citizenship should be added as an indicator.
And I think fine arts and
And
music
American
should be-
history should be added as an indicator. One state just added a citizenship exam.
The more the merrier. You can move the score up
I
to
agree, the more the
50%.
merrier. I
And
think
move it
there
up
are
to
other
50%.
indicators that can be added that have objective measures.
But I really think foreign language.
And there are lots of good objective foreign language measures.
I mean, if you
So-
happen to be at a school where your foreign language is offered as an AP course, I guess you could get in there, but other than that's probably not the case most places.
So the motion was asked to be clarified. So the motion is that the CCR weighting remain at 25% for the first year of implementation. And then for the second year, we would be looking at other measures that might be considered for college and career readiness, and possibly increasing the percentage required for college and career readiness weighting.
I'm comfortable with that.
So roll call, please.
Dr. Freitas,
No.
Mr. Hendry,
Yes.
Ms. Neal,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
No.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker, Superintendent Ritt.
Yes. So the next item is transition to ESEA flexibility waiver.
Actually, we had a memo
Oh.
as our team was drafting rule language that didn't make it into the PowerPoint deck. So I think between Debbie and I, maybe we can walk through the additional guidance we need. Right now, the panel recommends an equal weight for graduation and college and career readiness, which is consistent with the current A through F system. So we want to just validate with you that seems right to you to continue doing what we've been doing.
So to expand a little bit, currently for the 2015 A through F, if you're looking at a high school, it's 30% graduation, 30% college career readiness, 20% English language arts, 20% math. As we moved through the accountability panel, we continued with those weights. Panel felt that was very reflective and accurate for assessing a high school. So moving forward in multiple measures, that would be 60% for multiple measures. Again, within the multiple measures domain itself, it's 50-50 between graduation and college career readiness. So overall, that's 30% graduation, 30% college career readiness. And then transitioning outside of multiple measures, we're looking at a weighting between performance and growth of 60-40, 60% performance, 40% growth. So for your overall high school, you would be looking at 24% performance, 16% growth, and 60% multiple measures, again with multiple measures being an overall of 30% graduation and 30% college career readiness. So we just wanted to affirm that those are accurate weights to move forward.
And they've been working for us in those aspects. I think that's a good motion. I wouldn't want to repeat it.
I think the motion would be just to hold the line on the current
Correct, the current
weightings,
weighting,
and
yes.
I'll bring that as a motion.
Second.
Weighting regarding
With
Multiple
regard to
measures.
regarding multiple measures in the high
measures,
school. Okay.
maintain current weights.
Okay,
on
thank you.
multiple measures.
And there's been a second. Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry,
Yes.
Ms. Neal,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Mr. Wicker, Superintendent Ritz.
Yes. Are we ready for the, do you have something else?
Okay. Right now, in the current rule, the minimum number of students required to calculate growth is 10. So we wanted to just, again, with some of the appeals and other things that we've had coming before you, want to just see if you wanted to maintain that 10 threshold of students.
Is that the statistical number based on research? Because I don't have that number memorized, but statistically, is that the correct number?
Right. I don't have access to all of the various studies performed for the original A through F, but they did do various studies with that to come to some statistical accuracy. Keep in mind that when we're looking at 10 students as the minimum, we're actually looking at 10 students in the bottom 25% subgroup. So what you're looking at overall is 40 students at least in the school, and breaking it into a subgroup of bottom 25% of 10 students, and 30 students being then in the top 75% subgroup. All of the data runs that we have performed and prepared for the panel as well as the state board has that 10 set as the minimum. We can certainly continue to take some looks at that to see if there's any negative impact. However, from my personal perspective, I think it was, there were more negative impacts under the current A through F system, having a 1-point penalty associated with those 10 students than we will have moving forward where there's just points assigned for those 10 students.
Thank you, Debbie. How long have we been using the 10? It's been longer than just the last system, hasn't it?
So our minimums do vary. So when you're looking at performance, for example, our minimum number of students is 30. You have to get to 30. Now, within the new system, we're very happy when we're testing grades 3 through 10, we'll actually be able to get to 30 a lot more frequently and do away with the small school scenarios, et cetera. For other items, we have used 10 previously. I believe improvement in the previous systems was a 10 minimum as well. And certainly throughout A through F system, 10 has been used as that minimum.
I think even data on our ISTEP scores suppressed if you don't have 10.
10 is definitely our minimum for suppression. Our suppression rules do revolve around 10. We've heard from some schools, we've received a lot of feedback that they'd love to see some of those minimums, in particular the 30 students for performance lowered. Many schools don't like to use multiple years worth of data. They want to be assessed on 1 year's worth of data rather than multiple years. Fortunately, again, as we move forward with this, since we're not looking at 3 through 8 and 10, we're looking at 3 through 10. Hopefully we'll be able to move away from that and see a lot fewer schools fall under a small school category.
Thank you, Debbie. So, Brad, do you have a
Yeah,
motion?
no, I'm there with you on 10. I do have a question. But it's a related, and I just want to ask it because then I won't have to keep you up there and ask you later. But with regard to the data, when these schools are concerned about their data, is the rule that's going to be coming at us address the appeal process?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I want to know, is that we've got language in there for that, because no matter what we do, as I've said before, there's no perfect system, there's only useful systems. We're still going to have situations, and I just want to make sure, we've had some issues, I think, with understanding what the appeal process is, and I just want to make sure we clear that up in the language on this go-around, so it's really clear what happens on that. But I would move for staying at 10, if that helps us.
In the draft we sent last Wednesday, there's some language in there, and we are working with the department staff to flesh that out.
Thank you.
So,
Can I just comment on the appeal since Brad brought it up? I'm hoping the appeal is not a retry of the data or to recalculate the data. I hope it's written in such a way that if there's a due process issue, that should be the appeal. I think something we've learned hopefully in going through this process is that people see us as being able to retry the numbers and recalculate the numbers. And I don't think that's useful for the board or for the schools or for the students. And so I would ask if you're going to rewrite that or write something that it be an appeal only on the process.
okay, so we have a motion to approve the in size of 10. Do I have a second?
Second.
More discussion? Roll call, please.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
I will abstain unless my vote's needed, since I didn't hear the discussion.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker? Superintendent Witt?
Yes.
Sorry, one more thing that Debbie just brought up. So in the existing rule, there is the ability for a new school to have the option to be graded based just on growth only for its first 3 years. And the pleasure of the board, we can keep it that same way, or Debbie has just presented another idea, which is a good idea too.
Sure, as outcome of the accountability panel, there was really no recommendation to continue with the growth-only model since growth is weighted more heavily in the new framework. Another potential option is to use the existing framework but alter the weighting to weight growth more heavily. So currently we have 60% performance, 40% growth. So as an alternate for schools that have been open for less than 4 years, perhaps we could take a look at what happens if we weight that growth more heavily for those schools and provide that as an option as well.
Have we run the scenarios,
We have
though,
not.
keeping it the same with our 60-40?
For new schools,
Yeah.
we have not for the new schools.
Oh, I guess we haven't, we don't have new schools coming on. So I can see where the issue would be. So have we taken a look, though, at schools that were brought on and run the calculations?
Yes, so any school that we previously had data on, we've taken a look at that to be able to see how those schools panned out. And those were included in all of the information, all the data runs that we've performed before. We've not taken a look at them as a separate model, if you will, or a separate set of rules of what it would look like if we did just growth only, or what it would look like if we just simply, again, switch some of the weighting for those schools to be able to apply more weight to the growth. We haven't gone there just yet.
And I will just, I can remember there was quite a lot of heated testimony on this for particularly charter schools. That tends to be where you have new schools wanting to have growth only. So whatever you do, I would imagine we're going to have some comments during the public hearing, and you could always hear the input and decide what the final rule language should be. Is there a thought?
I just want to make sure I may not be fully understanding. So we're anticipating that there could be a concern based on what's happening with the reauthorization. Is that?
No, sorry, we haven't gotten there yet.
They're not talking about that yet.
Sorry.
That's why you lost me, because I'm.
Yeah, they put that slide up and they talked about another whole
Sorry.
issue. I saw you looking.
Now your comments make a whole lot more sense. Because I was about ready to ask, what in the world does the federal government care about?
Right.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that we maintain the growth-only model for new schools for 3 years. Oh, well.
Crickets.
Is there a second?
Crickets.
I'd actually like to see the data. I mean, I'd like to see what it does.
So we'll keep it as is now and bring back to you some data
Yeah, that
for
would be
January
good.
7th, and you can make a decision then.
And we're going to get testimony, right?
And we have a while through
Based-
the rulemaking process to
Right.
change that. That would be better for me. What do you think? Is that okay, Tony?
Well, I didn't get a second, so it doesn't matter what I
Oh,
think.
well, that's true. So
Doesn't change my mind.
So, BJ, you want to make the motion then?
Which motion?
The motion to keep it the same
I'll make the motion that we maintain status quo
until we see the data.
until Do you have a date on that?
No, we're gonna
or-
get the data.
I don't think we need a
You don't
motion
need
if
a
we're gonna bring it back to you in January, is that a?
Yeah,
Do we
we're just
need a
gonna bring
motion
it
to
back, so
just
we don't need
hold
anything.
a
We're not even gonna
committee?
vote. Okay, gotcha.
All right, I just wanted to point out that the U.S. Department of Education just issued its new guidance for the
Sure did.
renewal for the waiver.
Oh, boy.
And I haven't looked closely at it, I don't know if you had, but they had something around new accountability models and that there may be more of an impact not being able to be an A if you have a certain achievement gap. So we obviously need to talk to the federal liaisons as we are finalizing this language to make sure that if, as Indiana moves forward with submitting a renewal request for its waiver, assuming it does, that we're taking that into consideration.
So you can imagine the turmoil that this has caused with groups who already have accountability systems in place
Yeah, this is.
and having to put a whole new wrinkle to it. We, at least we're in the process of building a new one so that we can build it in if we need to. But this is looking at the gaps between the subgroups and having a certain percentage of achievement, so to speak, and narrowing those gaps, and that you could not receive an A if you had not also narrowed the gaps. So it is going to be a little complicated to actually figure out where we want to head with this. This will be a bulk of our work here going forward as we're doing the rulemaking process, but it's not to take action on today, obviously.
No.
We have nothing to present to you, but this has put a pretty big wrinkle into what it is that the states are doing with their accountability systems.
I have to ask, if every category is seeing growth, then how do you reduce the gap?
We get to decide some of this, okay? The problem is, we have to decide. I agree with you, and our system may be a whole lot easier to deal with than some other states, to be honest, because we've set up a system where we're gonna recognize them both separately. So we actually are gonna be able to take a look at data and what's that gonna look like in the system.
I just was gonna encourage y'all, I would say for right now, we stay the course and do what we think is best
You
for our state,
betcha.
because I actually am hearing that Lamar Alexander is gonna be taking over
We
as chair
hope.
of the Senate Education Committee. He's talking about in the reauthorization of the actual statute, more flexibility, and I know I've had some conversations with a few of the federal lawmakers about, you know, if it's working well in the waiver, why not just make it the law? Why do we have to have a waiver? Just write it into the law. I mean, what a concept. So I'm still holding out hope that maybe there'll be this thing will play itself out in a way that resolves itself in the larger law. But right now, if I'm following you, you're saying that the waiver app itself is carrying this kind of language. I would just say, I'd love to see the superintendent and us stay the course, let them push back on it. If we feel like we're on the right track, let them try to explain to us why we're wrong.
You sound like Andrea.
I know. Aren't you proud of me, Andrea? You're telling us tell the federal government to stay out of Indiana.
Pour it all together and not worry about all these little details.
Yeah, I think that we are always better off when Indiana asserts itself on these issues.
Great. Well, regardless of how we handle that, we do have to do something with the feds, so we will make sure we do that. Okay, we talked about this on numerous occasions. The panel had wanted to remain engaged with the board through the public hearing process. I think that'd be a great way to get feedback from the folks who lived this for more than a year. So I think we would like to recommend that we find ways to bring them in and have a conversation with you again, or at least go on the road show for public hearings and help be another filter for feedback across the state and any
Steve
other
Yeager and
ideas.
I are going to write a thank you to all the panel members and inviting them to be involved. So we'll begin that process.
Great. Anything else the board wants to weigh in here on communication? Okay. Special student populations?
Sure. So let's just touch on this very briefly. Special student populations, just wanted to affirm what we are currently doing to be carried forward in the new language. So for special education students, there is a 1% cap for alternative assessments as defined by federal regulations, as well as ensuring that we can calculate growth using the NCSIC assessment. So if moving forward, if NCSIC is the alternative assessment for multiple years, we should be able to calculate growth and include that in the model as well. So just want to make sure we get a thumbs up on the 1% cap. Again, that is a separate process that happens when we release A through F information. It used to be 1%, 2% caps, and now it's just the 1% cap since we no longer have IMAST.
Well, we actually don't even have any say in that. That's a federal regulation.
federal?
That I hope is changed when the reauthorization, because for the first time, we're gonna be experiencing students who don't even have the capabilities of reading the assessment that we're gonna give them on grade level. And it is going to be so frustrating for some special needs students all over the state of Indiana. And it will impact, you know, some of our accountability scores.
And finally, English language learners, we do have a provision that students in the United States for less than 1 year can be excluded from the English language arts calculations. So moving forward, we'd recommend continuing with that as well. Again, that's also under federal regs that we have that opportunity to allow those students to be excluded from the calculation. Now, they do have to participate in the language assessment. Previously Lost Links, moving forward WIDA. However, they don't have to take the English language arts portion of the I-STEP, and they're not included in the performance section. Great.
Thank you.
So I don't think,
Anything else?
do we need a vote on that? It'll look like consensus on those, so we'll take that as consensus. Okay, just wanted to show you the timeline. So we are January 7th, second bubble on the left there, bringing you language for you to vote on. There's a whole technical process we have to go through for filing and registering the rule. The public hearings then, I can't read this. My eyes.
February, March.
Okay, thank you. February and March is when we're planning to hold the hearings, and that'll be in we're planning to do the 3 regional hearings like we did with REPA. April, bring back final language for you, and then we have to go through the Attorney General's office, state budget agency, et cetera. So that's the entire process. By getting the final language done by the end of the school year, that'll allow time for the department to put together training materials and help get schools ready for what's coming for the new accountability system. So I just want to make sure everyone saw the timeline here. Any questions about that? All right, and we just voted on this. You initiated rulemaking for the alternative accountability system. We have reconvened the stakeholder group that came up with language that the board adopted 2 years ago, and we are revisiting that. That rule was never filed, so the rulemaking lapsed, so you've just reinitiated that. The statute was changed this past session. The State Board of Ed is required to come up with an alternative accountability system for the dropout recovery charter high schools. So that's what that is, and we plan to have language for you by February or March. It'll be a little bit of a delayed timeline than the timeline I just showed you, but because we're actively engaged with the stakeholders, we have less concern about the due process consideration. And that's it.
Thank you, Claire and Debbie.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you so
you.
much. Best practices, innovation, and education. Evansville, Vanderburg School Corporation, BJ. Did you want to introduce?
Absolutely. Dr. Smith is with us. And I think more than anything, we just wanted to kind of celebrate. I think we spend so much time here bogged down in really important things that need fixed, that we kind of forget to celebrate the really, really good things that are going on in our state. And I'm a little biased, but there are some great things going on in Evansville, and I just wanted to share those with you and celebrate what's happening. So, Dr. Smith,
Thank you,
I'll
Dr.
turn
Smith.
it over to you.
Thank you. Superintendent Ritz, members of the board, good evening.
Not quite, not quite.
Just was testing.
Not quite.
I really do appreciate the opportunity to represent my team of teachers, administrators, my board, all of our staff, and it's an honor to be with you today. Just a snapshot, and I did place this packet in front of you during one of the breaks, so I will be brief on many of these slides. That just gives you an overview of who we are in terms of demographics. We serve students in Vanderburgh County as our district, 244 square miles. We've had a lot of people visit us lately, and invariably they will say there's something different about Evansville. Maybe there's something different in the water, and what's different about EVSC, I would really suggest nothing. One thing we do know is that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is just a failed model. So we are very disciplined whenever we incorporate new strategies, systems, initiatives, that we do so with the guidance of solid research. We don't have a secret recipe, but we do have incredibly talented people. Our work with Mass Insight has been among the very best things that I've seen in my 32-year career in education. One of the things in the scope of work for the first year with our partnership with Mass Insight was that they helped us lead a strategic visioning process, and that was done after they did a very thorough diagnostic review of our entire corporation. What was incredibly beneficial was the utilization of the PELP framework. This was the framework that came out of Harvard about a decade ago, and it was incredibly beneficial because it helped us focus our work. In the center of the PELP framework is the instructional core. What happens with the teacher, student, and content is incredibly important. And I've heard it said numerous times in our district that EVSC has never been more focused or intentional about really what matters most. And I take a great deal of pride in that. Out of the work of our strategic visioning process, we identified 3 priorities, which you see in front of you: student learning, investing in effective people, basically teachers and leaders, and then infrastructure. While infrastructure may not be very glamorous, I'm here to tell you that it is incredibly important. You have to get very close to the work. You need to have systems and structures in place to make certain that the work is being done in a very accountable manner. Also, you see that the title of this slide is the continuous improvement process, because I am here to tell you that a strategic plan that sits on the shelf is not worth the paper that it's printed on. So that's why we've moved the visioning process into our continuous improvement process. Next, we have, I think, several things which are best practices. I would like to highlight just a few of these. First of all, full-day kindergarten. We have invested in full-day kindergarten as a district for over 25 years. I think we were one of the first districts, if not the first district in the state, to invest in that. Additionally, since 2009, we have invested in pre-K education using $1 million for Title I funding, educating over 280 students. And we're pleased to be one of the 5 pilots in the state. We are ready to accept those students. In January, we've invested over $500,000 just to be ready for the pilot program. Additionally, we have collaboration. We have an incredible partnership with our Teachers Association, and an outgrowth of that partnership and that collaboration was our equity model. Equity model, as you may know, was a precursor to the transformation zone that was only achievable because of the collaborative effort with our teachers. Moving forward, performance management. I think performance management may be one of the most beneficial things that we do in our district. It has been an evolution of many years, but we are having those difficult conversations. We do them in clusters, basically high school attendance district clusters, and it has made a tremendous difference, especially when we are driving towards school improvement. Operational excellence. I think we are one of only a handful of districts in the entire nation that embraces operational excellence. I am blessed to have 9 black belts in my district, Lean or 6 Sigma black belts, I will add, not the other kind, but black belts that are trained in 6 Sigma. And because of our efforts, for every dollar that we expended for central office expenditures in 2006, I only spend 48 cents on today. That's a reduction of 52% in central office expenditures. And we've done that through lean practices. And then these are other changes that we know clearly impact students. I won't belabor this, but I do want to lift up, we've added 34 minutes to the instructional day for elementary school students. The new evaluation tool for teachers moves us from mere compliance to one of professional growth, and I don't even like to call it an evaluation tool. It really is a coaching model for us. And response to intervention has been huge, and then the creation of the transformation zone, which I'd like to address now. You see embedded in the next slide of the deck many things that have occurred during this timeline, but I wanted to lift up just a few. EVSC, as I mentioned earlier, initiated equity school model, and that was really a model where we gave schools enhanced autonomy. Teachers had to opt in, but in order for them to opt in and be selected for teaching in our 3 equity schools, they had to complete a 40-hour equity academy and successfully complete that But what we learned from that is that we can't just expect schools to fix themselves. We had to change what we did from a central office perspective, and that's why that was really the precursor to our transformation zone. We were introduced to Mass Insight education through Brown University through our Learning Leadership Cadre in 2009, and that was an incredible opportunity for us. In 2013, we did launch the TZ School, and Carrie Hilliard, Director of School Transformation, is here, as well as Kelsey Wright, who's a transformation strategist. They've stuck with us through the entire day. Also, last year, we approved, the board did, the continuous improvement process. This takes out all of the other factors that were in the environment at the time, and as I noted, 2012, our partnership with Mass Insight has been incredible. That is when we determined that the best way for us to help our schools that serve the greatest percentage of at-risk students was to develop the internal lead partner. We know that it not only increases our capacity, but it is the only sustainable answer that I've seen, and it's working. And here's evidence. The first year, growth in English and math throughout the 5 schools in the transformation zone. You see Evans Elementary. There are improvements in 1 year, as well as McGarry Middle School. These 2 schools represent 2 of the top 40 most impoverished schools in the state. They're both now A schools. Both of these schools were in the original equity school model, as was McGarry. I think you will notice that McGarry held a hearing because of the accountability, because of the situation that they were in. They no longer are subject to state takeover because of the work that they've done in the transformation zone. When we look at I-STEP scores, it's nice to note that in the last 4 years, we've had double-digit growth in most of our categories. Also, when we look at the I-STEP growth rate in English language arts over the last 3 years, we're nearly triple that of the state, and we should be, because we're behind the average in the state. But we're nearly triple the rate in ELA, also in math, and also when we look at the growth rate of passing both sections. I'll leave this slide up for more than a few seconds. We're not where we want to be. Clearly, we'll say that every time this slide is displayed. However, a 300% growth in the percentage of A and B schools in just 2 years. I inherited 15 schools that were F schools. We now have 15 schools that are A schools. More than 75% of our schools are A's, B's, and C's. I have an incredibly dedicated and talented staff that has gotten so much done in just a short period of time. I also have a superintendent advisory council, and we meet on a regular basis. After one of the sessions where we were talking about initiatives and how we were going about our work, I had an individual highly respected in the business community in Evansville that said, all of this is great, but when are we going to see the needle move? Well, I was happy to show at the last Business Advisory Council, the needle has moved from 17% of our schools that were A's and B's 2 years ago now to nearly 60%. We talk a lot, and I've heard a lot of conversation today about what are we doing for our most at-risk students or most at-risk schools. I think you know that we have worked diligently in EVSC on behalf of our at-risk students and our schools that have a number of at-risk students in them. But I'm also pleased to be able to point out that EVSC was just awarded or was just named to the 5th annual AP District Honor Roll, one of only 20 in the state. So I think that's also evidence that we want to make certain that all of our students have an outstanding education. So I'm pleased that our high ability students are also doing incredibly well in our district. And then finally, it's nice to end on this slide because EVSC this year was the national winner of the Quality Data Campaign district use for district student data. So we use data to move student outcomes and student performance forward, and it's nice to be #1 in the nation for something that is as important as use of data. So that is my presentation. I could have gone on much, much longer, but you have the information in the packet. Be happy to answer anything that you may have or I'm here for your pleasure.
Well, this is my second time to get to hear you, Dr. Smith. I just wanted to thank you because I said this to Carrie earlier informally out in the hall, and I really do believe this. I think Evansville is really helping to lead the way in influencing how we approach this whole work of school transformation. And I know you're saying you're still trying to think through what is we're doing, but here's the reality. It's relationships. And what I love about it is in every one of your systems, and I was looking at this again last night, whether it's leadership development, whether it's teacher evaluation, whether it's culture and climate, what I like that you're doing is you're looking at how to unleash the influence of people in each one of those systems. And I think that's the result of when you do that. When you invest in people, you can't go wrong. So I just appreciate that because I don't want to put my colleagues on the spot that are on the school turnaround, but seeing their recommendations today earlier, I couldn't help but think a lot about Evansville as I was reading through those priorities. So I think you've already influenced us quite a bit.
Well, thank you, Dr. Oliver. I've said often, we all have access to the same buildings, same technology, same curriculum. The difference maker is our people.
That's exactly
and the relationships. That is the difference maker. So thank you.
Yes, Tony?
Before I'd actually seen the data regarding the turnarounds in Evansville, I'd asked BJ, I'm like, BJ, how's Evansville making all this progress? And he summed it up quickly. He said, we have a rock star superintendent. I think that may probably be at least partially true. But I know this isn't really on the menu, but I have to ask you, since you're here and you waited all day, you've come up with a very innovative way of dealing with teacher evaluations. Could you just briefly tell us what you're doing? Because it may very well be a good model for the rest of the state.
We did a lot of research. Mass Insight certainly helped with that, and a very collaborative effort with our Teachers Association. We looked at what is it that a teacher can control. We looked at what is it that we can actually analyze from a teacher's performance. What are they responsible for? What do they bring to the table? We know that they're responsible for planning the lessons. They're responsible for how they deliver the content. They're responsible for student behavior in the classroom. They're responsible for making certain that those assessments actually assess what they should assess. All of those things are critically important. We also pull a lot of the work from Marzano. So, as I said, we also want to view this as a coaching model and coaching session. The web interface is eye observation. As I said earlier, we want to move away from compliance to professional development. Through eye observation, we're actually able to glean areas of weakness in our teachers so that then we can plan professional development based upon the needs of our teachers in each individual school and each individual high school attendance district and then the district as a whole. We also do not value at all the sit and get methodology of professional development. That's why we take our Title II dollars and invest in academic coaches, because we know that job-embedded coaching is where you get the biggest bang for your buck. So we really wanted to make certain that the evaluation tool was most reflective of teacher practice and not that reflective of the students that were assigned to the teacher. I have a school corporation that has outstanding suburban schools, and then we have, as you've seen, schools that have 94, 97% poverty. It is amazing that when we take a teacher from a high poverty school into a suburban school, that test scores that are attributed to them change. And they're the exact same teacher. So we never wanted an evaluation tool that was punitive. If we wanted an evaluation system that measured what a teacher actually brought to the table, and then also we could utilize that evaluation tool for professional growth. Hope that answers your question.
Well, so can I follow up on that?
Certainly.
What percentage of your evaluation is based on objective measures?
10% of student outcomes.
We heard today that 33 to 50% was kind of the recommended. So that's
Not based on the research that we've done.
Okay, thank you.
And we spent a great deal of time on that, I assure you. I also need to staff all of my buildings, and I do know that if we move to a percent that is beyond what we think would be best practice, that staffing the schools with the students that have the highest need would be next to impossible.
Could you continue to use your 10% to make your own decisions about your faculty, even if the state used a higher percentage in its state evaluation system?
I think we'd have to follow whatever the guidance, or not the guidance, but the regulation was in law.
Andrea, currently, schools can adopt their own percentage. There's nothing in statute that determines what significant is.
Okay, but I felt we got the guidance today that we needed to better define significantly inform.
You did vote on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You did.
Yes. you know, there's been also a lot of conversation about the need to train evaluators. Completely agree. The inter-rater reliability in a district such as mine with 39 schools is hugely important. But we dismiss on average 35 to 40 teachers a year. They never make it through the evaluation process. We put about 25 teachers on a plan of improvement. The same Business Advisory Council that I spoke of earlier, because they brought up the subject, well, how, and we didn't fall under this yet because this is our first year under the new rules because we had a contract that just ended. But they said, how can it be that 98% of the teachers in Indiana are rated effective or highly effective? And I said, well, we had an individual that had a car dealership, many car dealerships, and I said, would you be willing to take your auto technicians, and they may be very good, but you may rate them needs improvement in some areas to where their overall evaluation was needs improvement. Would you be willing to put that out in the public, and then to have individuals say, I don't think I want my car serviced at your dealership anymore because you have technicians that are not evaluated as effective or highly effective? That makes no sense from a business perspective, because there are some things that you need to do to work with your employees to build them up. I just want us to make certain that we take the total picture into play. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Your success story is compelling, and you're here today to share with us. And I was wondering, are there YouTubes of you speaking or other documents? Or I'm thinking about my leadership students at IU that they asked me, how do we turn around schools? And this is a success story. I hope you're going to say there's some information available that I can send students to. And if not, is there any way that you can create some documents or videos or something? Any plans for that?
Not really. First of all, you give me way too much credit. I'm just part of a team that
Well, you're the
is phenomenal.
spokesperson.
But yes, I am blessed to be a spokesperson. I'll be happy to come talk to your folks anytime, or you can send them down to Evansville, because what we found is that there's not a silver bullet, and it takes time. None of our schools got into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. But by adhering to a good, steady course based upon sound research, not the flavor of the month, good things happen. And it is all about relationships.
Did you say it was a systems approach too?
Systems approach, clearly.
That's sort of the theme today, right? Systems
Clearly,
approach.
clearly,
So
yes.
I'm just trying to move the agenda. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I hope in our strategic planning committee, we will come back to this conversation, because I heard something there that I don't think was quite accurate. We received a report from TNTP. We did not vote on the recommendations of that report. We're still going to talk about those on our committee, right? So, because I want to have this conversation, because it's not just us looking at it in terms of recommendations coming from it. I know there are legislators that are thinking that the solution is to keep raising that percentage. We have to be able to articulate this in a way that they can really understand. You did a great job doing that today, and I think it would be wise for us to engage Dr. Smith a little bit more in trying to help articulate that, because at the end of the day, you know, I really hope that, I think what you've done is you've created a culture around that where it's not punitive. If I'm one of your teachers, I really believe you have my best interest at heart. You want to make me better, and by doing that, I make my kids better.
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of local control. Please, there's not one size that fits all. Please.
Are you on the next part of the agenda too, on your charter authorization?
Actually, Dr. Blue is, among her other duties, she oversees our charter agreement, so.
Just one
she's
last
going to
thing
be
before you leave,
very
though,
quick.
Superintendent.
Yes, sir. By the way, Glenwood had a 92% passing rate in IREAD, so I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I knew it was something. I'm delirious, so I'm having a hard time getting my thoughts together now. But there's something about your teacher compensation model that has a deterrent built in for switching schools or something. You remember we talked about that?
We do incentivize teachers to stay at our high-need schools, and that's defined by 80% poverty or more. Our compensation model is based on a number of points. Each point is awarded a dollar value. If you teach at a priority school for us, which is 80% or higher, then that's worth 2 points. The first 2 years, that's a stipend for each year. The third year, both those stipends, and then that amount goes on your base. So that is a real incentive to stay in high-need schools. That actually gets you to the top of what used to be our scale, 1 year faster for every 3 years of service. Thank you.
Was that it?
That's it. Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Ritz, members of the board. I'm before you today just to give you some very brief information from a charter authorizer perspective about the charter schools that we have in Evansville, Vanderburgh. And you all have, I think, seen the presentation, so I won't belabor it, and I can answer any questions that you have. But what I really wanted to focus on is the fact that we have a very transparent relationship with our charter schools. There are only two, a K-6 and a small high school. We haven't closed any or non-renewed them, and we've have been in relationship with them for over 10 years between the two of them. So the data, as you can see, Joshua Academy, I think they look to us, actually both do. We've done professional development with them. Whenever they need us, we're always available. But we've greatly influenced them as far as their use of data. They're really looking at data a lot more now than they have in the past, and really having students look at data, which I think is very interesting for their school. So the principal also wanted me to make sure to point out to you all that even though they are still a D school, she says, tell them we're a high D, because they got a half a growth point since their last I-STEP. So they've been, pretty consistent over the last couple of years. Signature School is, of course, doing very well. If you know anything about Signature School, they have very high pass rates on I-STEP and ECA. High number of students taking advanced placement, and one of their goals is to increase the number of students who are taking advanced placement and scoring 3 or more or better on the exam. They have a strong focus also on IB, as you can see. So those are kind of the two things that they really push at Signature School. Their SAT averages, you can see here. I think they had 20 or 30 students who took the ACT. I don't remember how many took the SAT, but you can see the average scores that they received on those college readiness assessments. That's something that, they really strongly push for all of their students. They had 100% graduation rate. Academic honors diplomas, 73, and only 4 core 40 diplomas. So their focus is really that, academic honors. Their attendance rate, which I thought was interesting, that it was a little lower than that of Joshua Academy, probably for very different reasons, the two schools. But no expulsions for either school. I know that Joshua is also focusing in on positive behavior supports, as we are in EVSC. So they are also moving along. A lot of the work that they're doing, it had been slow in the past, but I think they're picking up a lot of the similar practices as we have in our school corporation. So, and that's really all. It's very straightforward. Our relationship is very harmonious, so there isn't too much to it other than just kind of that straightforward data. You all have any questions by chance?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
We have Beacon Academy, Lafayette School Corporation.
They are not here.
Okay, all right, thank you. SBOE staff update, do we have an update?
Very, very briefly, thank everybody for their patience and work today. I just wanted to say around the Evansville teacher evaluation, we need to look at that carefully. While we can be very proud of what Dr. Smith is doing, and I think we have to look at the significantly inform and the 10% and what that means in terms of waiver, and just consider that carefully as we move forward. And we can talk about that more through the Strategic Planning Committee, and I'm sure that TNTP will address that. But just be aware that there's some language around that we need to consider. And we'll go forward with that through Mr. Hendry's committee.
Pre-K pilot update, I think we have the PowerPoint. Do we have any questions?
fairly self-explanatory.
It is.
Given the time, if you want me
Thank
to talk
you.
about it, I can, otherwise just read it.
Everybody okay?
Everyone all right with that?
Thank you very much
No,
for waiting.
thank you for letting me know.
No Child Left Behind waiver update. I know you got an update from Danielle as well, talking about current initiatives. You already know that we have a renewal waiver due in the end of March.
And I can send an email on this, but can we get that on the agenda so we at least have some discussion on it? Because I understand that's a sensitive area because the department leads on it, but I do think there are areas that butt up against areas where we have responsibility. And rather than wait until the last minute, I'd really like to get ahead of that in terms of us talking about what the thinking is on how we're going to approach that app.
Okay. Assessment update. Michelle, I think you also provided a memo for us. Do you guys have any further questions regarding assessment? We're moving forward.
I think the only thing, I do want to make a comment on this one as well, because I had asked, I said in the last meeting I was going to reach out to DOA council, and you received the memo back from DOA. They're taking the position that essentially the contracting agency basically dictates the process. That being said, I just really wanted to be clear that I would not view that as a board process, because it's not. So I'm not saying anything about the quality of the process, but I would just be very careful to not put us on there, because even though we served on the assessment subcommittee, it was very clear to me in receiving that back that DOA is saying that the department's driving that process. So I guess I got a little sense of, I saw a survey that had our names at the top, and maybe I misunderstood the survey, but it wasn't, I don't consider it board when we're not giving input to that process.
So I hope that you understood my comments of me wanting to include the board in the process that we were dictated to use. So, because if I had my druthers, you know, as a board member, I don't have any say either. So that is what it is, I guess. Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.